Important day in the political calendar and certainly the most important day so far in this Labour Party's tenure. Send your views in. What do you think about today's show on Downing Street? Was it that nightmare before Halloween you feared or not as bad as you expected? Get in touch. GBNews.com/your say. But now here's your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 3 o'clock. These are your headlines. Rachel Reeves has vowed to invest as she announced one of the biggest tax-raising budgets in a generation and the first for a Labour Chancellor in 15 years. Laying blame on the Conservative Party, who she says failed Britain, she said austerity broke our NHS, Brexit broke businesses and the mini-budget broke the economy. Turning to taxes, the Chancellor confirmed to the Commons that taxes will rise by £40 billion, saying any Chancellor would face the same reality and any responsible Chancellor would take action.
The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services.
However, in his final act as interim leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak slammed Labour's financial plan, claiming it proves the government hasn't been straight with voters. The former Prime Minister claims the Keir Starmer and the Chancellor fiddled the figures and that working people will have to pay the price. He said Conservatives warned of Labour's hidden tax and borrowing plans, which he now calls a truth come to light. Here's how Rishi Sunak summed up the Chancellor's budget.
National insurance, up. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up. They have fiddled the figures. They don't like it, Mr. Speaker.
So let's take a look at some of the sweeping changes covered in the Labour budget. First, a 6.7% increase to the minimum wage, bringing it to £12.21, and a rise in national insurance for employers to 15%. VAT will be introduced on private school fees in 2025, while non-dom tax status is set to be abolished. Capital gains tax will rise, with the lower rate moving from 10% to 18%, and inheritance tax thresholds frozen until 2030. A £2.3 billion boost goes to schools, with tripled funding for breakfast clubs. And an additional £2.9 billion will also be directed to the Ministry of Defence. Now, GB News can reveal that yet another migrant has died in the English Channel today, as the number of people crossing illegally hit a new record high of 30,000. Around 15 people were rescued after they fell into the sea while trying to join a boat off the coast of Calais this morning. One man was declared dead when he was brought ashore. The latest death brings the number of people who have died while attempting the journey so far this year to 50. Southport attack suspect Axel Ruda-Cabana has appeared in court, charged with terror and biological weapons offences. The 18-year-old appeared via video link at Westminster Magistrates Court to answer the new charges, including making the deadly toxin ricin and possessing an Al-Qaeda terror manual. Authorities discovered a quantity of the toxin at Ruda-Cabana's home following a stabbing attack at a dance class in Southport, which left 3 children dead and multiple others injured. Despite the new charges, police haven't classified the incident as a terrorist attack. Ruda-Cabana will return to court next month on the 13th of November. And just days before the US election, footage has surfaced of President Biden appearing to call Trump supporters garbage.
And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
The White House insists he was targeting hateful rhetoric used against Puerto Ricans at a recent Trump event. But Republicans and Trump's campaign have condemned the comments. Seizing on the controversy, Trump accused Democrats of running a campaign of hate. Meanwhile, with the polls showing the race is still neck and neck, Vice President Kamala Harris is urging Americans to turn the page on drama and conflict. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Now get ready for 3 hours of common sense, helping you to make sense of today's budget, because Chancellor Rachel Reeves has revealed taxes will rise by a whopping 40 billion quid as she delivered the first budget by a Labour government in 14 years. She said the country had voted for change as she mounted what looks set to be the biggest raid in history in the Commons earlier on today. And take a look at the Chancellor in action.
The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services.
Well, so much to analyse and make sense of, and let's start by going to GB News presenter Tom Harwood. Tom, it was the first Labour budget in 14 years, the first ever female Chancellor delivering a budget, and we got the biggest tax rises in history, £40 billion worth of tax hikes. Tom, tell us more.
Yeah, it's stunning, isn't it? We were told about a £22 billion black hole, but in the end, taxes rose by almost double that number. If we look back over tax-raising budgets throughout history, Gordon Brown's in 2010, and indeed George Osborne's later that same year, or whether you look at Norman Lamont in the 90s, whether you look throughout history, the highest that taxes have ever gone up in today's money was around £37 billion. Well, today it's smashed all of that out the water. This is the highest taxing single budget in the country's history. And it's not just the biggest single rise in tax in the country's history. It also takes the total tax take as a share of GDP, taxes as a share of our economy, well beyond, far higher anything we have ever seen before in this country's history. We might have seen all of these different numbers and analyses on where the tax take as a share of GDP, the so-called tax burden, was going last year. That was umming and ahhing as to whether it was tipping over that 1949 peak. Well, we are now miles beyond that, absolutely miles beyond it. I've been looking at some of the OBR's analysis in what they call the Blue Book. They published this alongside the Treasury's own documents, and it does say that taxes are going up by 40 billion, that taxes as a share of GDP will never have been higher. And actually, interestingly, because there's this extra spending, because there's this extra borrowing, the OBR says that inflation is going to be 0.5% higher than it otherwise would have been too. So that implies that mortgage rates may well go up. It's a cocktail of bad news for people. And I want to zoom in on one fact, Martin, that comes to this £40 billion in extra taxes. £25 billion of that, the vast majority of that 40 billion, is coming from a tax on jobs. It's coming from the increase in employers' national insurance. The threshold for employers paying that will go down from over £9,000 to £5,000. Yes, you'll only have to earn £5,000 £1,000 before your employers will start having to pay employers-level national insurance on this. Now, the government says that this is not a tax on working people, but I've been reading through the Blue Book from the OBR, and they say that in year 2, this will decrease wages. It's written there in black and white from the OBR's own analysis. In year 2, it will decrease wages due to that knock-on effect from firms having to find the money from somewhere. It seems as though the vast majority of this tax rise is a tax on jobs.
Tom Hord, meticulous expert analysis, I'd expect no less. Thank you very, very much for starting the show for us here on GB News. Thank you very much. Let's come back to the studio. I'm delighted to bring in the Tory peer, Lord Craig McKinley, and also the former chief economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. I'd like to start with you, if I could. Craig, first of all, it's magical to see you, the bionic man, just wonderful, wonderful. You must say that all the time, but I truly, truly mean it. Let's look quickly, if we can, through today's top-line numbers, some of the huge numbers that leap out. Employers' national insurance increase, 25 billions. Capital gains tax, 2.5 billions. Inheritance tax, 2.2 billions. None of this was mentioned in the manifesto of the Labour Party. In fact, Sir Keir Starmer said to GB News there'll be no tax increases above the tax increase he set out at the time, which was non-doms, VAT on schools and oil hikes. So even the casual analysis shows there are monstrous taxes here that nobody saw coming. We've heard about them in the media, but they weren't in the manifesto. What's your take on today?
Well, we've had 14 years since the last Labour Chancellor stood on their feet and gave a budget. I think the taxpayer would rather they'd been away from the dispatch box for another 14 years. We've got a huge number of tax rises. And the really serious one, well, there's lots of serious ones, but the very serious one is the tax on jobs. Now, it's pure wordsmithing to say that that doesn't break the manifesto pledge. An employer has a certain budget for staffing, and if he's now got to pay an increased amount of employers' national insurance, and this is a savage rise. Not only the 13.8% up to 15, even I might have guessed it might have gone to 15, but reducing the threshold down to 5,000 from just over 9,000. What that means, if you've got an employee on £9,000, the employer's got to find £600 more just to keep that employee going. So what's the employer going to do? Is he going to suffer lower profits? Probably. Is he going to perhaps look at his old staffing budget and say, well, I'm going to have to let one go? What does this really mean in real terms? It doesn't just come out of thin air. That is a very serious one. Now, in terms of the inheritance tax and capital gains tax, rises in CGT up to a maximum of 24%. Thankfully, landlords aren't going to get too badly hit. That 24% was actually a proposal that I'd pushed to chancellors over my entire term as an MP, because I want people to sell their properties. I want people to actually own their own. So the 24% rate is not a bad rate. But the inheritance tax one, now tucked away in there is the real seriousness in my view. So you built up a business. You are now allowed to leave £1 million value of business tax-free to your heirs and successors. Anything above that now will bear tax at 20%. So you imagine you've got a high-value business with no cash. Where are you going to find this 20% IHT from? Are you going to have to close up this business, break it up? And similarly, for agricultural property relief, £1 million threshold, after that you're going to have to pay 20%. That is a very, very serious measure. The non-dom measure, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that I'm against the changes to non-dom, and it's strange, isn't it? If you go and talk to the Treasury in Portugal or Italy or Spain, they will say, welcome, welcome. And as Maloney said, PM Maloney, she said, if wealthy people aren't here, they're not spending money. So this will be a negative measure. But you'll never make an economy more wealthy by increasing tax. There was that great saying of Churchill, you can't tax yourself to growth any more than a man can stand in a bucket and pick himself up. And I'm afraid that is coming over very, very clearly in this really ill-conceived budget.
And can I quickly ask you, you mentioned there about small business very passionately, minimum wage. Now, minimum wage increase sounds great. I mean, who wouldn't want lower paid people to get a better screw out of every hour? £12.21 now from £11.44. Yesterday, the Telegraph estimated that will cost small businesses an estimated £6 billion quid. When you add all this up over entire workforces, it's a lot more than a row of beans. And if you add that to the national insurance hike, every worker getting paid less. We've already seen the Wetherspoon share price take a hammering, because these are the kind of sectors that will be impacted by minimum wage. People part-time suddenly become full-time taxpayers. It all spells bad news for small businesses.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to pay too much credit, but there was one thing, is there was a bit more business rate relief for shops and hospitality businesses. About the only good thing about it. But yes, minimum wage always sounds very nice and cosy and friendly. 6.7% up for those over 20, I believe. That has to be found again. It has to be found again. So what are you going to do? You're going to either put your prices up, that's inflationary, that's going to lead to higher interest rates for longer, or you're going to lay a few people off. It's a difficult one, because, you know, even the minimum wage as proposed is not a king's ransom, and I get that. Now, I think it's more dangerous is the increasing the rate for the 18 to 20-year-olds. Yeah. You will find that an employer will say, well, I might as well pay the full rate for somebody older with a bit more experience. I'm not going to pay a pretty hefty rate for a youngster. We're going to see youth unemployment skyrocket.
Jonathan Portis, what's leapt out at you from your Professor of Economics hat wearing? What are you looking at?
So I think this is certainly a very large tax-raising budget. I think we should take with a grain of salt some of the stuff that Craig has said. However, for example, the idea that you can't tax your rate of growth. You know, you can't directly, but that doesn't mean that this will have a big negative impact on growth. In fact, the OBR expects that overall, because of the increased investment, it will have a positive effect on growth. And I was actually in the Chancellor's office back in the early 1990s, working for a then Conservative government, and the largest tax-raising budget in history, just slightly bigger than this one compared to the size of the economy, was actually Norman Lamont's budget. And after Norman Lamont's budget in March 1993, we then had 7 years of growth averaging about 3%, close to 3% a year. Any Chancellor, particularly...
I think that's because we left the ERM.
Well, no, I'm not saying that the budget in itself delivered growth. But it didn't stop growth. And indeed, any Chancellor, certainly any Chancellor over the last 14 years, when we've had pretty miserable growth under the past government, would have given their eye teeth for growth that came after that tax-raising budget. So we shouldn't be too, these are large tax rises and they will have some impact. But I think we shouldn't scaremonger. So, for example, taking the employer national insurance, which it is a big rise and it will have some impact. But the OBR, using the best available evidence, the same type of evidence it used to assess the last budget, estimates that this will cost about the equivalent of 50,000 jobs, about 0.1 to 0.2% of the workforce. Now, that's not welcome, obviously.
Yeah,
but we're
not if it's your job.
But it's still
unwelcome,
0.1%. So this is not the end of the world. More broadly, I think the really other big change, of course, which we haven't talked at all about yet, is this loosening of the government's fiscal rules to allow considerably more borrowing for public investment.
OK, well, we've got plenty of time in the show to talk about that, gentlemen. We have to go to a break now. Thank you very much, Jonathan and Craig, for kicking off the show. And stay tuned, because we'll be crossing live next to a Northallerton pensioner for his reaction to Labour's budget. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News, Business News Channel.
GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A furious online debate has been sparked after, well, let's just say a rather large man, I mean, he really was big, was snapped trying to fit into his seat.
It's led to some to ask whether obese passengers should have to pay for extra plane seats so they don't inconvenience others.
Some say, though, that's cruel. So should plus-size passengers pay extra for plain seats? Let's talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller, who's in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the director of All About Obesity, Sarah LeBrock, who's in beautiful Harrogate. Good to see you both this morning. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, we've had this debate before with Steve and I, to be fair, and I think it's one of those things where planes are just not fit for purpose anymore. So people's bodies have been growing over the years. We know this, the obesity rates are increasing, etc. But what's happening to planes is the seats are decreasing in size. So they're just not fit for purpose and not fit for the population. So I think it's just one of these things where we need to be more empathetic to people, that they're trying to fit into an environment that isn't shaped for them at all. So I think we do need to kind of say, well, what's right here? Is it the person not being able to fit in the seat, or is it the seat not being fit for purpose for the person? And I think we need to really, look at things from that perspective as well. Instead of thinking the person's doing something wrong, how about the environment might be doing something wrong?
Steve?
It's not about blaming, but the message you can't put out, in my opinion, is that it's okay to be obese and don't worry about it. You see, what I'm saying here is free plane seats. If you're offering free plane seats, an extra seat, that's going to normalise obesity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back. It's 3:24. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has revealed taxes will rise by a staggering £40 billion as she delivered the first budget by a Labour government in 14 years. And let's cross now back to GB News presenter Tom Harwood. Tom, tell us more.
That's right, Martin. I'm actually joined here on College Green, just outside Parliament, by Shadow Treasury Minister Gareth Davies. Gareth, thanks for joining us. Rachel Reeves is raising taxes today, and she says it's all your fault.
Yes, she is, and she would say that, wouldn't she? But this is a historic budget that's going to affect millions of people across the country. It's a budget of broken promises. She said she wouldn't raise taxes. She said she wouldn't raise national insurance. She's doing that for I think £25 billion worth today. And so this will hurt families, it'll hurt businesses for sure, and workers across this country, working people, if you want to put it like that, will be paying more as a result of this.
Of course, what the Chancellor says is that this is a direct consequence of your mismanagement of the economy, of spending commitments that were not funded. For example, that £10 billion to go out to victims of the infective blood scandal, or indeed postmasters. Those sorts of payments were not funded by your government when you were in government. What do you say to that?
So we launched the inquiries into the post office scandal and the infected blood scandal. They were scandals and tragedies for those families. And we committed to paying the compensation once we received estimates and the inquiries had concluded. We hadn't received that by the time of the general election, and if we'd have won the election, we would of course made difficult decisions to be able to pay those.
So you'd have had to raise taxes too?
Not necessarily. We would have been able to meet our fiscal rules, not fiddle them. We would have been able to pay for those compensation amounts and made decisions in a normal budgetary process. But she's going way beyond this, Rachel Reeves. She's raising taxes to £40 billion, which is the highest level of any budget in British history. She's gone way beyond that. By the way, she's also spending on public sector pay deals. She's spending £8 billion on GB Energy, a company apparently that will not produce any energy or reduce energy bills. She's introducing the National Wealth Fund, which is another £5 to £7 billion. So if finances were that bad, why is she splurging on all of these pet projects that will do nothing for growth? Today's OBR report clearly shows that her number one priority, to grow the economy, won't happen. It will grow, but it will not grow faster than it would have done had we been in charge.
The OBR documents say that the first 2 years show higher growth, albeit the further 3 years then show lower growth. Do you accept higher growth in the first 2 years?
Look, over the period, this is going to be worse for growth than the OBR predicted in March. When her central number one priority is to grow the economy, she's failed. She's completely failed at the first hurdle. while whacking on more borrowing, more tax, and a harder time for British workers when she said she wouldn't do it. She's broken her manifesto pledge.
There's been an ideological shift, seemingly, today, where the Chancellor has brought the levels of tax and spend in the United Kingdom much closer to those in France and Germany and much further away from the sort of American model that we were a little bit closer to, not very close to, but a little bit closer to. What if that's what the country wants? What if the country wants higher taxes and billions more spent on the NHS, as she also announced today?
Well, that's not what they voted for. She was very clear that she wasn't going to do that. And if she was going to do that, which she always knew she was, then she should have said it. But she doesn't have a mandate for this by any means. But you're totally right. The international comparison is probably accurately described as French union laws with German levels of taxation. This is not what we do in this country. We support British business, particularly small businesses. We don't cripple them with more regulation and more tax. That's exactly what Labour have done in their first few hundred days.
Gareth Davies, Shadow Treasury Minister, thanks very much for joining us here on College Green. Back to you, Martin.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Gareth. And let's come back to my panel now. Of course, that's the Tory peer, Lord Craig McKinley, and the former chief economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes. John, let's start with you. The OBR, so the £22 billion black hole. Jeremy Hunt saying it's a myth. It doesn't exist. And the other allegation is, how come they didn't know about it before they got into power? What's the actuality?
Well, the OBR in its report today does make quite clear that it feels that the Treasury, whether that's civil servants or Jeremy Hunt or presumably a combination of both, did genuinely mislead them. It concealed very large overspends, particularly on asylum, that the OBR should have known about. So there is a genuine black hole. On the other hand, there are also things, we were just talking about inflected blood. The government has today provided about £10 billion odd to pay for the inflected blood scandal.
11.8 billion.
Now, that wasn't in the OBR numbers in March, but nobody can reasonably say that we didn't know about it because, of course, that has been public for some time. And I think it's fair to say that the scale of the tax increases we're saying, essentially what the Labour is saying is the public plans for public spending just didn't do the job. We need more money to pay for the NHS and so on. Well, I think we all knew that before the election.
Craig?
I find it really hard to believe the OBR didn't know what was happening. I think we've got one of the most open democracies around the world. We've got the Public Accounts Committee, I used to serve on that. You've got National Audit Office. You've got Treasury Ministers. Now, if Treasury Ministers have misled the OBR, well, that's a different matter, because I find it hard to believe that a previous Chancellor would be over all the detail that his Treasury staff should be actually doing. But do we really believe the OBR? I've been very suspect about the OBR for a long time. Their report out today, the borrowing is 24 billion now more than in the spring. So they're wrong by 24 billion in just 6 or 7 months, and yet they've now laid a forecast out for the next 10 years. I'm sorry, I think it's cuckoo land, because generally whatever they produce is always wrong. I hope they're right, because there's some growth in there, and I certainly hope we see some growth. We're going to need it, but I'm afraid I am always rather dubious about what the OBR puts out.
Gentlemen, superb. Craig, Jonathan, excellent start show. Thank you very much for your expertise. And let's cross now to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Anna Riley, who's in Northallerton. Welcome to the show. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Martin. Yes, I'm here with Derek Brown. He's 74 years old, he's a pensioner, and he also cares for his wife, Margaret, who's got dementia. Derek, just tell us what your key takeaways were from the budget, and of course with the pension triple lock being preserved as well, that £473 extra next year.
Yeah, that's very reassuring. We were sort of expecting that, and with them taking away the £300 heating, it's sort of it's a nice to have, and we did expect it. But my focus really with Margaret and the dementia is on the health and care side. And the information they're saying about the health service was interesting. They said they're going to look into putting together a 10-year plan starting next April. The sarcasm in me would say, well, they've had 14 years to put a plan together, but that's beside the point. They also said that they're going to invest £1.5 billion in new beds. Great. They're going to look at getting a maximum waiting time of 18 weeks. Great. putting together another 40,000 appointments. That's great. But there was no mention of the single occupancy council tax reductions, which is good because they've not mentioned it. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't mean it's not going to come up next time. It just isn't mentioned this time round. And also, they've not mentioned attendance allowance. Now, attendance allowance is fundamental for people who are caring. There's only attendance allowance and council tax discount that's available to both to people who are looking after somebody with dementia. Yes, there are other benefits. Yes, I agree. But those are all means tested. And for the vast majority of people who are caring, the pensioners, they've been working all their lives. They've been saving up all their lives. And then, when it comes to how much support they get, just council tax discount and just attendance allowance, that's all they can get their hands on.
And Derek, you're a passionate advocate for people with dementia. What is it like, and what more would you like to see from the government? Because people like yourselves are saving the government millions of pounds in caring at home.
The basic thing for me is that there should be more concentration on the pathway. They call it a health pathway, and which is a sort of method of a process of looking after somebody when they're dementia. Now, there is a pathway, yes, but it only goes through the process up until somebody's diagnosed. The pathway, so for people that are new to it and learning all about dementia, yes, they go through the system, they go to the clinics and they find out that somebody's got Alzheimer's or one of the 200 plus different kinds of dementia. But they need the help from that point on, because as it stands at the moment, the pathway finishes and everybody is left on their own. They're sent back to the GP. They're on prescription for whatever is the correct medication. There's only 4 medications for people.
So sorry, Derek, we'll just have to leave it there. Thank you so much for having us in your home and sharing with us what your thoughts are on the budget. That's the take from Derek here in Northallerton.
Anna, make sure you tell him, Derek for Prime Minister. Magnificent. Thank you very much for joining us here on the show. Lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. It was Labour's first budget in 14 years, but how did they do? We're bringing more reactions throughout the show, of course. But first, here's your headlines with Sophia Wenzel.
Martin, thank you. It's 3:35. These are your headlines. Rachel Reeves has vowed to invest as she announced one of the biggest tax-raising budgets in a generation and the first for a Labour Chancellor in 15 years. Laying blame on the Conservative Party, who she says failed Britain, she said austerity broke our NHS, Brexit broke businesses and the mini-budget broke the economy. Turning to taxes, the Chancellor confirmed to the Commons that taxes will rise by £40 billion, saying any Chancellor would face the same reality and any responsible Chancellor would take action.
The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services.
However, in his final act as interim leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak slammed Labour's financial plan, claiming it proves the government hasn't been straight with voters. The former Prime Minister claims Sir Keir Starmer and the Chancellor fiddled the figures and that working people will have to pay the price. He said Conservatives warned of Labour's hidden tax and borrowing plans, which he now calls a truth come to light. Here's how Rishi Sunak summed up the Chancellor's budget.
National insurance, up. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up. They have fiddled the figures. They don't like it, Mr. Speaker.
And in other news now, Southport attack suspect Axel Rudakabana has appeared in court charged with terror and biological weapons offences. The 18-year-old appeared via video link at Westminster Magistrates Court to answer the new charges, including making the deadly toxin ricin and possessing an Al-Qaeda terror manual. Authorities discovered a quantity of the toxin at Rudakabana's home following a stabbing attack at a dance class in Southport, which left 3 children dead and multiple others injured. Despite the new charges, police haven't classified the incident as a terrorist attack. Rudakabana will return to court next month on the 13th of November. Some breaking news now just in, and the first UK case of a potentially deadly strain of the Mpox virus has been detected in the UK. The UK Health Security Agency says the risk to the UK population remains low. The person involved had been on holiday in Africa and travelled back to London on an overnight flight on October the 21st. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2989 and €1.1981 euros. The price of gold is £2,136 and 12 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,171 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Quite a cloudy afternoon on offer, but there is going to be largely dry with some brighter spells, particularly across the south and east, and feeling mild where you do catch that brighter weather. We've currently got high pressure over the UK, which is dominating our weather through today and for the rest of the week and into the weekend. So conditions not really changing. As we head into this evening, it is going to remain largely dry across the country, a mix of cloud and some clear spells, and where we see those clear skies for the longest, some pockets of mist and fog may develop. Turning damp across the northwest of Scotland though, and also across Shetland, so quite a damp morning by the time we reach Thursday, but otherwise remaining fairly mild across the country. To start off tomorrow then, as I say, fairly damp across the northwest Highlands to start off with, as a weak frontal feature just slowly sinks its way towards the southeast of Scotland, and outbreaks of rain for Shetland too, and starting to turn a little bit breezy under that cloud and rain also. For Northern Ireland, Northern England, cloudy, largely dry, though that cloud thick enough to produce some rain and drizzle around hilly areas at times, and elsewhere across England and Wales, a mix of cloud and some brighter spells. Any mist or fog generally clearing away, and as that high pressure sticks around, that leads to us to a rather settled day, though those outbreaks of rain continuing in the northwest of Scotland, once again across the Northern Isles, and fairly breezy around exposed spots too. But once again, where you catch that brighter weather, it should feel fairly mild for this time in October. Now tomorrow it's Halloween, so if you're heading out trick-or-treating, I'm pleased to tell you it's actually going to be largely dry across much of the country, though we are still going to continue to see those outbreaks of rain in the far northwest and still staying fairly breezy here too. But otherwise it is going to be a largely dry evening, just mostly cloudy. And conditions aren't really changing towards the end of the week and into the weekend. Largely dry, cloudy at times, and fairly mild for the time of year.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Big queues away from the northeast of Chester remain this afternoon. The M56 eastbound Chester services 14 to 12 at Runcorn, still 2 lanes combed off there. It's for ongoing emergency road repairs. The queues back past the M53, almost onto the eastbound side of the A494. The Tame Road in Tame in Oxfordshire remains closed from Mill Road through towards Albury View in Tiddington, and queuing there, that's the A418 at the scene of a 4-vehicle collision. They're heading towards Chevalier Street in Ipswich. The eastbound side of the road is blocked from Waterloo Road to Norwich Road and queuing. Again, it's due to a collision. And congestion too for the clockwise M25. Firstly, it's slow towards the QE2 bridge. Earlier, Daybreed's been safely moved, but it's queuing still. Clockwise also slow in the roadworks towards Waltham Abbey at 26. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. It's 3:42. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, the Chancellor announced exemptions when inheriting farmland are to be made less generous from 2026 in the budget this afternoon. And for more reaction now, let's go to GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie. Dougie, yet more grim news for farmers. Tell us more.
Well, we covered this on the 11th of September, actually pointing out that Harold Wilson did exactly the same thing in 1974 when he came to power. It drove the price of food up, it put small farms out of business, and it was actually Margaret Thatcher in 1985 that reversed that decision, because farms are asset rich but income poor. In other words, they have taxed assets as wealth, and that is not the case. In fact, farmers have had it so hard over the last 2 years. Over 1,000 dairy farmers in Britain have quit, and that's because the single farm payment is down, and it will also cause things like tenant farmers to lose their farms, because of course there will now be a rush to get rid of this land before this actually kicks in. And the biggest thing that she hasn't noticed here, that is 94% of farms throughout the UK operate on an overdraft situation. And what is the security for that overdraft? Well, it's your land. And if you can't sign it away 7 years in advance, or if you do sign it away 7 years in advance, the banks will not back you with that security. £1 million on a farm is the top end. You wouldn't buy a paddock and a farmyard for that. If you take it that ground's about £10,000 an acre, you've got to say to yourself, well, 100 acres isn't even an average farm. That would be £1 million, and then your yard, your stock, your machinery, you'd be up near £4 million pretty quickly, and that means that the average farmer would have to find nearly £600,000 to keep the farm in business. This will push food prices up very high indeed. That's why Thatcher took it away in '85. But the real thing that I will be watching here, Martin, is the planning reform, because farmers have the right to claw back if farmland is put into agriculture. And is this maybe how the government's going to do this? By almost taking the farmers' land in areas around towns to build her 1.5 million houses.
Dougie Beattie, I think you've absolutely nailed it. I really think you've nailed it. I think that's what it is. It feels like a war on farmers. It feels like a war on their land. If you've got to sell up, guess who's going to come in and sweep your land away from you? Probably the state. And what are they going to do with it? Whatever they choose. Dougie Beattie, always on the money. Excellent. Thank you for joining us on the show. Let's get my panel in now back here in the studio in Westminster. And as the Tory peer, Lord Ross Kempsell, and the financial columnist at the Daily Mail, Jasmine Birtles. Welcome to you both. Let's start with you, Ross, if we could. Now, I know you've been particularly outspoken and passionate about one topic, and that's the VAT raid on private schools. And at least for you, the people you've been fighting for, some good news today. Tell us more.
That's right, Martin. If you think of the British Armed Forces, they're operating 24/7 across the world, from the Falkland Islands to Cyprus, from Africa to Asia. And those families receive some support from the government to enable them to send their children to boarding school, so that it doesn't have a huge disruption on their education, that they're being deployed overseas. Now, we were very worried when we heard about the government's plan to put 20% VAT on private school fees, because up until now, the government hadn't made clear how those military families would be impacted. And today, we found buried away in the budget document on page 130 some welcome news that the allowance that those military families receive is going to be uplifted to an extent to lessen the impact on them.
So that means that the children of military families can continue as they are, so there won't be that additional financial burden on them. But it's a small comfort in the bigger picture. I said earlier on, we said that back in June, Sir Keir Starmer said to us there'd be no tax rises beyond non-dom, beyond VAT on private schools and windfall taxes. And yet today we've seen the thick end of £30 billion of increases on national insurance, on capital gains, on inheritance. Is this a budget of broken promises?
Yes, Labour have repeatedly said that they want to unleash a decade of national renewal. Actually, what this budget does is unleash a decade of national reversal if it goes through to its full implementation. The reason being that Rachel Reeves has dropped a £40 billion tax bombshell, particularly on employers who are job creators, and that will reduce the number of jobs. It will bring down wages. I'm talking about, of course, the increase in national insurance contributions from employers, a tax that Rachel Reeves herself in October 2021 called a jobs tax. So it's a budget that not only goes back on Labour's record, but paints quite a bleak picture, particularly for employers.
And Jasmine Birtle, as your post bag at the Mail, you deal with people out there trying to make a living, trying to get by. What's leapt out of today's budget for you? I know you're particularly passionate about the increases, the sting on small businesses.
Yes, because I run my own business as well. I have moneymagpie.com. It's a small business. I have 2 or 3 employees. And it is going to be tricky because, with the national insurance rise, it's going to make it much less attractive to bring in more employees. And my employees have shares as well, so they have a concern about this. So we're going to be looking at freelancers and contract workers rather than actual employees. So I think I understand much of what she's done. I mean, it's a Labour budget, definitely lots of giveaways. But the problem is that although she talks about stability and being able to fund it, she's looking to fund it from the people who are actually working. And there are fewer and fewer of those because many are leaving the country. You've got people who are very rich or running their own businesses. They're leaving the country, taking their tax money with them. And if you keep effectively punishing the people who are making the money, who are creating the business, then it's going to be very hard going forward to actually fund all the giveaways that they're wanting to do.
And Jasmine, we've spoken endlessly on this channel about the dreaded fiscal drag, freezing of tax thresholds over the years, which effectively means over the years with inflation, more and more people are paying higher taxes. The Labour Party said, we're going to keep them as they are, as if that's a good thing. Surely they could have ended these brackets and cut taxes. That didn't happen. Is there a feeling, do you think, some people are thinking, what's the point of work? If I get a pay rise, I'm giving it all away in tax.
Oh, literally, yes. I mean, there was just a few seconds when I thought, oh, she's going to get rid of the fiscal drag. No, she said it'll be 2028. And by that point, of course, all sorts of things can happen. In 2027, she can go, well, we were going to get rid of it, but, this has happened, that's happened, so we can't. And I think, as you say, I've got people writing to me saying, I've just had a pay rise or I've got bonuses and half of it's gone in tax. I'm not going to bother anymore. I'm going to take early retirement or I'm just going to stop because what is the point? And when you get that, I mean, I had one person saying that last year he earned £500,000. Brilliant. Half of that went in tax. Now, still, 250,000 is a nice amount of money, but it's just so annoying to give 250 grand to the government to waste in its own special way. They don't want to do it.
OK, thank you. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Jasmine Birtle, Lord Ross Campbell, for your time. Thank you. Excellent. And next, we'll be crossing to the Liberal Democrat leader, Daisy Cooper, for her reaction to the budget. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tell us about this film, because it's obviously come from your own experiences.
We wanted to create something for the entertainment industry that wasn't just another kind of dull documentary. I mean, some of them are brilliant, they're very informative, but you kind of leave a bit bewildered and a little bit kind of flat. So we thought, I've got a passion for writing and you've obviously got an unbounded knowledge on the subject. Why don't we create a film with a kind of satirical look on eating disorders?
So this came it's been made 20 years after your own...
It is 20 years.
20 years,
practically to the day.
So Samantha, you suffered with OCD and an eating disorder as well?
Yes.
And that's when your mum became a counsellor, is that right?
A little bit later on, I think we spent a bit of time in the system and I realised that it wasn't working for us. So I took it on myself to learn as much as I could about the subject.
I call it a tragedy, probably the wrong word, but suffering.
No, it is a tragedy because mental ill health and eating disorders destroy the lives of not only the sufferers but their families as well.
But you've turned that into something so positive and so
It's
inspiring.
amazing, really, that 20 years ago our story was just beginning, and 20 years on, we've done what we've done. But I have to say that very little has changed in the system.
I've heard that.
And I think that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, so...
That was why we wanted to... I mean, I work with families every day and I see the destruction that eating disorders and other mental illnesses not just bring to the sufferer, but the whole family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really passions me, because obviously 20 years ago we were there. And I just feel that so much more needs to be done. And I think with eating disorders, there is still a lot of misunderstanding around the subject.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe. Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 3:53. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Let's cross straight back now to Tom Harwood. He's with the Liberal Democrat leader, Daisy Cooper.
That's right, Martin. I'm with the Deputy Leader of the Lib Dems, Daisy Cooper. Daisy, what did you make of the budget?
Well, we wanted to see a budget that was going to save our NHS and care, and so we welcome the fact that the government has put money behind the NHS, but they know and we know that unless they fix social care and tackle the social care crisis, they're not going to be able to save the NHS long term.
Billions more are being poured into the NHS, but of course that has to come from somewhere. And employees' national insurance is rising to a tune of £25 billion. Do you support that?
No, we're very concerned that the big burden of that particular measure is going to fall on small businesses and on the employees as well. We said repeatedly during the general election campaign, we said repeatedly since, that we think that there are other ways that the government could be raising taxes, looking to raise taxes on the big banks, on the big tech companies. Those are the kind of places where you should be raising tax, not on small businesses, not on hard-working, struggling families, not on pensioners and not on family farms either.
Of course, raising taxes on businesses and banks means that these businesses and banks can choose to base themselves elsewhere. Do you not think that's some of the consideration that the Chancellor might have made?
No, I don't think so. The fact of the matter is that many of these corporations are making absolutely millions, if not billions of pounds in profit. I'll give you one quick example. Just last year, 4 of the largest banks had a combined profit of £40 billion. Under our proposal for reversing the tax cut that the Conservatives gave them, that would just raise £4 billion. That's just a tenth of the profit that they made last year. So actually, whilst that would be a very small sum for some of these big corporations, it would make a really significant difference to turning our public services around.
Nowhere near the £25 billion that's being raised from national insurance, though. Let's move on to farmers, though, because that has been a significant moment in this budget. The National Farmers Union says that this could be the end of the family farm.
Yeah, and I think we Liberal Democrats are very concerned about this. During the general election campaign, we made a very bold pledge to invest £1 billion in our farmers. We know that we need to keep our farmers in business. It's good for food security, so we can grow our own healthy food locally. It's also really good for the natural environment as well, because farmers are the stewards of our land, and we are very concerned that this particular measure may force some of the small family farms out of business, and that, I think, would be unforgivable.
So you're opposing the budget on the basis of the farmers, on the basis of the national insurance rise. Can I take it you'll be voting against this budget?
Well, there are some things in the budget that we do support. So we do support the fact that the government is actually extending and changing the borrowing rules to invest productively, and that's a good thing for our economy. But there are some measures that we don't agree with and that we will oppose. So we'll look to see how the government packages up the votes, and we'll certainly be looking for ways to register our support for things that we support, but also to register our opposition to those things that we don't support.
Daisy Cooper, thank you very much for joining us. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Daisy. Now we'll bring you much more reaction to Labour's first budget in 14 years. £40 billion of tax rises from all across the country. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Still queues away from Chester this afternoon. The eastbound M56 from 14 to Runcorn at 12 still has 2 lanes combed off for emergency repairs. The queue is back towards the A494 towards Dunkirk. The M6, both sides around Stoke 15 to 16. There was a police incident. That's been sorted now. All lanes open. Still seeing some patchy queues though. And slow for the southbound M42. Shirley at 4 down towards the M43A. There was an issue that's been resolved, but still some patchy queues there too. Now the clockwise M25, all the traffic currently being held at Dartford 1B, a collision causing delays whilst that gets sorted. And also on the clockwise M25, Enfield to Waltham Abbey, that's junction 25 to 26, big queues back to South Mims at 23, at the scene there of a serious collision.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
We're giving you the chance to win everything you need to celebrate the festivities. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For your chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has dropped a 40 billion quid tax bomb in Labour's first budget for 14 years. But of course, she's blaming the Tories.
Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action.
And among those affected are small businesses who have been hammered with £25 billion of national insurance tax hikes, and with hikes of 1.2% for all employees and thresholds lowered, as well as an increase in the minimum wage, was today a nightmare on Downing Street for small business owners. And a 10-year plan for Labour is their mission to save the NHS with a £22.6 billion increase in day-to-day spending.
The largest real terms growth in day-to-day NHS spending outside of COVID since 2010.
And Rachel Reeves has also announced more funding for the defence budget.
Today, I am announcing a total increase to the Ministry of Defence's budget of £2.9 billion next year, ensuring that the UK comfortably exceeds our NATO commitments.
Rishi Sunak was on his toes today. He blasted Labour's budget, accusing them of fiddling the figures, of breaking promises and imposing £40 billion of reckless tax rises that will make growth less than under his Tory government.
Labour's claims about their inheritance are purely ludicrous. These are her choices, so stop blaming everyone else and take responsibility.
Well, it was the first Labour budget in 14 years, and it broke an unlikely and perhaps unwanted record, the biggest tax hike in history, 40 billion quid of tax hikes. And when we asked Keir Starmer back in June, would there be any extra tax rises, he told GB News no, there would not be. Well, by our reckoning, over what he said then, we got about an extra 30 billion quid's worth today came at us. What do you think about it all? Did you win today? Did you lose? Are you furious? Let me know, gbnews.com/your say. I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by the legend Alastair Stewart. We'll have the full analysis from him throughout the next hour, which is going to be an absolute delight. You will not want to miss that. But first, it's your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone 4 o'clock. These are your headlines. Rachel Reeves has vowed to invest as she announced one of the biggest tax-raising budgets in a generation and the first for a Labour Chancellor in 15 years. Laying blame on the Conservative Party, who she says failed Britain, she said austerity broke our NHS, Brexit broke businesses and the mini-budget broke the economy. Turning to taxes, the Chancellor confirmed to the Commons that taxes will rise by £40 billion, saying any Chancellor would face the same reality and any responsible Chancellor would take action.
The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services.
However, in his final act as interim leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak slammed Labour's financial plan, claiming it proves the government hasn't been straight with voters. The former Prime Minister claims Sir Keir Starmer and the Chancellor fiddled the figures and that working people will have to pay the price. He said Conservatives warned of Labour's hidden tax and borrowing plans, which he now calls a truth come to light. Here's how Rishi Sunak summed up the Chancellor's budget.
National insurance, up. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up. They have fiddled the figures. I don't like it, Mr. Speaker.
So let's take a look at some of the sweeping changes covered in the Labour budget. First, a 6.7% increase to the minimum wage, bringing it to £12.21, and a rise in national insurance for employers to 15%. VAT will be introduced on private school fees in 2025, while non-dom tax status is set to be abolished. Capital gains tax will rise, with the lower rate moving from 10% to 18%, and inheritance tax thresholds frozen until 2030. A £2.3 billion boost goes to schools, with tripled funding for breakfast clubs. And an additional £2.9 billion will also be directed to the Ministry of Defence. GB News can confirm that there have been 3 migrant deaths in the English Channel today, as the number of people crossing illegally hits a new record high of 30,000. Around 15 people were rescued after they fell into the sea while trying to join a boat off the coast of Calais this morning. One man was declared dead when he was brought ashore. The latest deaths bring the number of people who have died while attempting the journey so far this year to 50. And the first UK case of the potentially deadly strain of the Mpox virus has been detected in the UK. The UK Health Security Agency says the risk to the UK population remains low. The person involved had been on holiday in Africa and travelled back to London on an overnight flight on October the 21st. Southport attack suspect Axel Rudakabana has appeared in court, charged with terror and biological weapons offences. The 18-year-old appeared via video link at Westminster Magistrates Court to answer the new charges, including making the deadly toxin ricin and possessing an Al-Qaeda terror manual. Authorities discovered a quantity of the toxin at Rudakabana's home following a stabbing attack at a dance class in Southport, which left 3 children dead and multiple others injured. Despite the new charges, police haven't classified the incident as a terrorist attack. Rudakabana will return to court next month on the 13th of November. And in Spain, the number of people killed in flash floods has now risen to 72, according to authorities. It comes as rescuers continue to search for those missing after the worst natural disaster to hit Spain in 50 years. Videos shared on social media show torrential rain sweeping through towns, dragging cars, downing bridges and people trapped in floodwaters, some hanging onto trees. The Spanish Prime Minister told a press conference the devastating event may not be over, with more than 1,000 soldiers deployed to affected areas. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has revealed taxes will rise by a whopping 40 billion quid as she delivered the first budget by a Labour government in 14 years. Let's get more reaction now. Fresh from Westminster, joining me now is our political editor, Chris Hope, who's with the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride. Chris, over to you.
Martin, that's right. Joining me now is Mel Stride, the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary. Mel Stride, haven't the Labour Party got real and honest about the challenges facing this country? And that's why you're seeing, you know, some big tax rises, but frankly, it's what we need to see right now.
No, I don't think honest is the word I would immediately reach for, Chris. The Labour Party went into the last general election claiming that there was not going to be all these massive tax increases. They specifically ruled out in their manifesto an increase in national insurance. What we've seen today is a whopping £40 billion worth of tax hikes, 25 billion on employers' national insurance. Now, what's that going to do? That's going to mean 50,000 job losses, fewer jobs across the next few years as a consequence of that, according to the OBR. And when it comes to growth, which remember is what this government says it's all about, the actual level of growth across the next few years is going to be lower than they were forecasting back in March. So this is a really grim moment fiscally and for the economy.
Also worries about mortgage rates. Looking at the comparison when Jeremy Hunt was the Chancellor, it's going to be worse. The rates go up more now under Labour.
Well, the problem is, of course, that they've changed the fiscal rules, something that Rachel Reeves actually said she wouldn't do back in November when she described it as fiddling the figures. And a consequence of that is massive additional borrowing, which of course puts pressure on interest rates, putting those up. If you look at the forecasts, they show inflation running higher now than in every year compared to what they were expecting back in March as a result of the things that this government has come forward with. And of course, that in turn will require a monetary response, which means on balance, higher interest rates, higher mortgage costs for people up and down the country, higher costs for businesses who we're looking to grow and grow us out of the challenges that we have.
They're raising 40 billion in tax, but tipping half that amount into the NHS. Isn't that right? Don't NHS and the concerns about that polls so high all the time in polls? Don't voters want that money spent there?
So, look, solving our problems isn't all about money. Substantially, it's about productivity improvements. And in fact, if you could get us back to the productivity levels across the public sector we had before COVID struck, we would be about £20 billion a year better off. We don't hear enough from this government about the productivity plan for the improvements here. We hear about them tipping more money into various public services. We've got to hear more about productivity.
Your manifesto was funded to a great degree by cuts in the welfare bill. I didn't hear much about cuts in this budget.
No, and this is the big omission. Apart from Rachel Reeves accepting some of the reforms that I brought in, which is pleasing to see, she's said nothing at all at getting to grip with some of these spiralling welfare bills there are out there. If we took those that are of working age with some health or disability benefit, and we took the number on those benefits back to what they were before the pandemic, we would save £32 billion. That would be the substantial lion's share of the kind of money which is now falling very hard on people by way of increased taxes. They basically ducked. They've ducked the issue. They've said nothing about welfare, and that's not right.
And just finally, Mel Stride, this weekend your party chooses a new leader. Who's he going to be?
Well, let's wait and see. I haven't publicly come out with a suggestion for anybody at the moment. I'm going to wait to see what happens on Saturday. But whoever it is,
you're being a chicken. You want a job? Why declare now on GB News?
Hardly a chicken, Chris. You know, I stood myself when I backed myself, incidentally, and then I, of course, transferred to James Cleverly. So I think I've been pretty much out there. But I'm going to wait and see. They're two great candidates, and I look forward to uniting whoever wins to take on this rotten government over the next few years.
Okay, Mel Stride there. Certain on one thing: this budget is not all it's cracked up to be, but less clear on who he's backing for the Tory leadership on Saturday, Martin.
Mel Stride's no chicken, but well done for trying to roast him there. Well done, Chris Hope. Excellent. Let's get back to the studio. Looking forward to this all day. I'm joined by the journalist and the legend, the broadcaster, Alastair Stewart. Alastair, an absolute delight to have you by my side. You've seen many of these budgets over the years. You must have covered more than 20 in your time. Let's start with Rachel Rees. She made a big song and dance about the fact she's the first female Chancellor. How do you think she performed today?
I thought she was flat as a pancake, with all due respect to her. It wasn't an easy sell. And unlike two of the pin-up chancellors in my time, Nigel Lawson particularly, who I thought was a genius, and I was lucky enough to interview him several times, he knew as much, if not more, about the numbers, the OBR report, the Red Book, all of the background stuff, than the permanent secretaries who Rachel gave thanks to, which I thought was a generous move, because basically they do all the numbers and work out and what have you. But her actual delivery, I thought, was fairly flat, because it was a pretty flat package. One thing that struck me sitting in the green room, we were chatting earlier before I came in, taking all my notes, was that there were one or two moments of real class hatred in this budget, which I thought was demeaning to our politics. And you were talking to our mutual friend Ross earlier on about VAT on school fees. Yes. And as GB News viewers know, my daughter works in private education as well, so we know quite a bit about it. But when Rachel confirmed, without that help for families, military families, and I was a good example of that my dad got help with my education because he was abroad as well. But when she confirmed the basic premise that in September 25 VAT would be put on private school fees, the Labour side hooted with hooray, hooray, hooray. Yeah. And then a really silly little thing when she increased air passenger duty on people who use private jets, which must be less than 0.1 of 1%. Again, way. That's silly class stuff. It really is childish.
Yeah. In terms of, much has been made about the fact back in June when GB News interviewed Sir Keir Starmer, he said there'd be no additional tax rises above non-dom, above that VAT rate on private schools and the windfall tax on oil and gas companies. And yet today we saw the thick end of 30 billion quid's worth of increases, particularly on small businesses, national insurance for employers, capital gains, inheritance tax. What do you think that spells for growth in the country?
I think it spells out very clearly a fundamental misunderstanding about how the British economy works, which is cherished and embraced by both Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer. And that is that these nasty fat cut people, male and females, who make lots of money and come up with brilliant ideas, people like James Dyson and the rest of them, they're just a milk cow, and you can just keep tapping them. 40 billion quid's worth of tax, the lion's share of which went, as you said quite rightly, on wealth creators and employment providers, as one or two of the people on the programme earlier on was saying. You know, if I run a cafe or a hairdresser, so I think there was someone on who ran a driving school, and I want to take on somebody else, it's now going to cost me a hell of a lot more to do that, so why should I bother? And as Mel just quite rightly said, £1.3 billion on boosting productivity in cities. Well, the people who boost productivity are employers and workers. No help for them at all. Just pathetic.
And you and I are old enough to remember that back in the days of cracking up taxes, as we saw in the 70s, everyone just clears off. They go abroad, the wealthiest people, they never come back. Do you think we're going down the bad old days, the route of driving away those wealth creators, driving away the best brains?
Yes, absolutely. And Dyson, unfortunately, is one example of that. But yes, if you were a brilliant young man or woman like my son or my daughter, and I'm totally biased in that matter, but millions of people listening will know that they've got really bright kids coming up through the generations, and they come up with a really good idea. Why should they do it here now, when capital gains tax, when they eventually make a success of that business and want to sell it on to have a decent retirement, they're going to get hammered on it. And if they want to employ 10 people rather than 5, then they're going to get hammered on that as well. And I hate to finish on a really negative point, but all of that and all of you were saying earlier and Mel was saying to Christopher is reflected in the growth numbers that she published. Those growth numbers are pathetically low and below trend, going right forward to the end of the period of this survey. The best growth gets 5-6 years out is 2.6%. That's below trend.
Super. So, Alastair Stewart, absolutely magnificent stuff. Thank you so much for coming into the studio. And, of course, you're with us for the rest of the hour.
Look forward to it.
Please stick around. Now we're going to GBNews presenter Emily Carver, who's up there in South Shields. Emily, what are the people in South Shields telling you about today's budget?
Hi, Martin. When I asked everyone, when I told everyone I was coming up to South Shields, there was one place they told me to go, and that's Coleman's. This is a restaurant that's been around since 1926. 5 generations of owners of this business. Fantastic place to come for a fish and chips, I hear. And I'm going to speak to the boss, actually, and find out whether this budget does anything for local businesses, does anything for business owners. Is it a growth budget? Well, here I am with Richard Coleman-Ord. Richard, thank you so much for allowing us to come into your wonderful restaurant. The government said, you know, local businesses are the backbone of our economy, the backbone of society. Does this budget show that?
No, not at all. I don't think it's a budget for small businesses at all. I feel like, if anything, it's going to have an adverse effect because we're seeing rises across the board. And all it's going to do is it's going to give us 2 options. We either keep prices the same, and potentially that's going to put people out of business, or we're going to rise prices and see a decline in customers. I feel like any way you look at it, it's not positive for us at all.
Yeah, and we've got national insurance contributions going up. We've also got the minimum wage going up. How might that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be huge. I mean, we saw a huge hike last year in the minimum wage, and then we saw another 6.7% this year. So accumulatively, it's almost 18%, which is a huge rise for any business. And I feel, especially for the smaller businesses that were already struggling, all that's going to do is add pressure onto business owner, which is going to feed down to employees of these businesses as well. I really couldn't take out any positives from the budget.
So no positives at all for you. Now, this is the first Labour budget in 14 years. What were you expecting? What were you hoping for that you haven't got?
I wasn't hoping for a lot. I mean, we've seen, not just from the Labour budgets, but from all budgets, we haven't really seen a lot of constructive or positive things come, especially for small businesses, for the past. I don't know, maybe some relief somewhere down the line. I wasn't expecting another huge hike in the wages yet.
But just on that, do you think the new Labour government understand business, and do you think they consider you a working person?
I mean, the definition of a working person has now been changed dramatically over the past couple of weeks. According to what they say, no, but we are. We're a working class family from a working class town. I just feel like they said a lot for local small businesses. They wanted to support local businesses and kind of champion small businesses in the UK, but I don't feel like they've delivered for them.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Richard. Really great to speak to you at this fantastic restaurant. If you're down in South Shields, do come along and have a nice meal or just a drink at the bar. But there you go. That's the verdict from a local business owner here. 5 generations, nothing in the budget for him.
Emily, an excellent report there. Richard Coleman, the beating heart of Britain, and he believes his fish restaurant is getting battered by today's budget. Let's get more reaction now and get back to our political editor, Christopher Hope. He's with the Chief Executive of Labour Together, Jonathan Ashworth. Chopper, over to you.
Yeah, Martin, welcome back to quite a noisy College Green outside Parliament, where some protesters are playing a song about money by Pink Floyd, because it's budget day, I suppose. With me now is Jonathan Ashworth, the former Labour MP and now the head of Labour Together. Jonathan, I hope you can hear what I'm asking you.
I can, but if I don't like the question, I might pretend I can't hear what you're saying.
Keir Starmer told GB News on the 13th of June there will be no increases in taxes over and above the ones set out in relation to spending in your manifesto, VAT in private schools and windfall tax on oil and gas companies. So no increase in tax, and today your old friend Rachel Reeves has ramped up tax by £40 billion, the biggest on record. Why is this happened?
Because what happened is my colleagues, when they went into Cabinet, were truly shocked when they looked at the books and they saw that a whole number of promises had been made on the never never by the previous Conservatives. Promises that the Conservatives had never communicated to even to its own official budget watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility. It had promised to fund the compensation for infected blood victims, quite rightly. It had promised to fund the compensation for those affected by the post office scandal, quite rightly. But it hadn't put the money there. And equally, it was spending money hand over fist on the numbers because of our broken asylum system in hotels. So they were utterly shocked by the scale of the broken public finances they inherited. And they had to take the tough decisions today to clear up the mess those Tories left behind.
But you also might be breaching manifesto promises, because you put £25 billion increase in employers' national insurance. If those increases are passed on to employees, which they might be, you are then breaching a promise, aren't you, in your manifesto?
Well, I remember doing lots of interviews with you and your colleagues at GB News in the election campaign. Probably too many interviews with you, frankly. In retrospect, I should have been in my constituency, but that's a different story. And the Tories were saying Labour hasn't made a commitment on national insurance employer contributions. And the Tories were right, and you were asking me about it, and we were always very clear. Our policy, our manifesto commitment was about employees, and it was about income tax and VAT. And Rachel Reeves stuck to her manifesto commitments today on those three taxes.
Just very finally, you've put up you've frozen fuel duty, but you've put up bus fares by 50%. What does that mean for your commitment to the environment?
Well, hang on a minute. We've capped bus fares at £3. It was capped at £2. That money was going to run out at the end of the year. We've extended it. We've capped it at £3. If that cap had gone, because the money was running out, it could have gone beyond £3. But it doesn't mean it's going to go up to £3. It means it's capped at £3. And of course, we're investing in our transport infrastructure. We're dealing with the potholes. I tell you something, it drives me crazy when you drive over a pothole. We're going to fix these potholes on our roads.
Just very finally, Jonathan Ashworth, mortgage rates to go up under the Labour Party more than having planned under the plan set out by the Tories in March, according to the OBR. You're like Liz Truss, aren't you?
Well, most certainly not. I mean, it's Liz Truss who helped send mortgage rates soaring. Let's see what happens with mortgages. They're decisions for the Bank of England, interest rates. They're not decisions for the OBR. So let's see what happens in the future on that.
OK. Jonathan Ashworth, he's head of Labour Together, a former Labour MP who put his neck out to try and win this party. It's a huge win back in the July election. Back to you, Martin.
Superb stuff there. Thank you very much both to Jonathan and to you, Chris Hope. Excellent. And we'll bring you much more reaction to the budget throughout the show, including I'm sure we'll be joined by the chair of the WASPy Women, of course, been fighting for women's pensions. An excellent guest. They'll be right after the break. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Online dating apps are still the go-to for millions of British adults, with 1 in 10 using them to look for a romantic connection.
Yes, are you one of them? Let us know. But with many apps introducing subscription fees and complex algorithms, the world of online dating has never been harder to navigate. So who better to join us to discuss this than Mr. Tinder himself, Stefan Pierre Tomlin. You have been dubbed Britain's best-looking eligible bachelor.
Yeah, so this happened back in 2016.
got an email from Tinder, and it was like, you're the most swiped man on Tinder.
So just explain to us, for viewers who don't know, what is swiping? What does that mean on Tinder?
Yeah, so on Tinder, the app, if you swipe left, that means you don't like the person in front of you. And if you swipe to the right, that means you like that person.
So do you mind still being associated with that? It's a good...
Well, I mean, it made me who I am now, and I love sharing how I was successful, and now I'm like a dating expert.
What's your situation now? Are you with anyone? Are you still single, paying the bill?
So I'm seeing someone at the minute. Things are going well, and I'm a dating expert, so I'm always giving advice to people.
Does she know your title of most swiped?
Of course, who doesn't?
Yeah,
It's quite hard. It's quite hard being the most swiped man on Tinder because you get a label on you. So I find it harder than anyone else, to be honest.
And where did you meet her? That's the big question.
At an event.
So not on Tinder?
Not on Tinder, ironically. Yeah.
So for all that troubled online, it's actually a real life rendezvous. Which
I mean, I have met people on Tinder in the past, and it has worked. Well, it didn't work, but yeah.
I need to know how to do the famous Stefan Smolder.
That camera is not a camera. That is your best friend, that's your lover. So you really smiles from the camera, so it goes like this.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:28. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, thousands of women affected by the state pension age changes gathered outside Parliament today, but despite growing calls to action, Rachel Rees made no commitments to compensating those affected in her budget. And I'm delighted to say I'm now joined in the studio by the chair of the Women Against State Pension Inequality, Angela Madden. Angela, I went past your protest earlier on. You were doing a sterling job, making loads of noise, making your voice heard. You've been out there for many, many years. I've seen you so often. Will anything, do you hope or believe, change under this government? Because from where I'm sitting, from where our viewers are sitting, the Labour Party so far hasn't been that kind to pensioners.
No, I think you're right, Martin, it hasn't. We do have one thing on our side, and that's a report by the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, which came out in March, confirming everything we've been saying for the last 10 years to successive governments. So I don't think this government will want to be the first one that totally ignores recommendations by their own watchdog.
OK.
Not if they're the party of integrity, honesty, and the party that wants to restore confidence in government.
And what does a resolution, a victory, look like? I was astonished to read earlier on, every 13 minutes a woman dies who's due what you believe they're owed. Time is running out. What does victory look like?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Since that report was published in March, 25,000 WASPy women have passed away. We're at the wrong end of our demographic. So our slogan is fair and fast compensation. We suffered injustice because the Department of Work and Pensions didn't tell us about the changes to our own state pension ages. Apparently they put a few adverts in papers, things like that, but they never told any of the women the effect it was having on them until those women were about a year or two away from the retirement they thought they were going to have. That was deemed maladministration, and the Ombudsman has recommended compensation, and we want that compensation to be paid as quickly as possible.
And what does that, do you want that to be backdated, so you get payments that were due at the time? What would that mean for individuals?
It's a one-off payment.
Right.
It is a one-off payment. We will never get back the state pension that we weren't paid. So what we are looking for is compensation for the injustice of us not being able to plan our own lives in the way that we always have done.
And Angela, we've seen victories after long, hard-fought battles. For example, tainted blood scandal, the post office scandal. Do you think you're the next one hoping for that same positive resolution?
Yes, we need to be the next one. We are another historic injustice. Both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in opposition accepted that we had suffered injustice historically and it needed to be resolved. We met with Emma Reynolds. She says she has no plans to kick the can down the road, but she needs to look into the Ombudsman's report, evidence from the Work and Pensions Committee, and we had a meeting with her which was very cordial. She was listening. This is a new government. They've been in place since July. It was heartening today to hear that they had set aside money for the infected blood injustice and for the post office injustice, and we're hoping that we are the next one.
Well, I wish you the very, very best of luck with your endeavours and your fight, and thanks for coming in. And you'll always have a welcome chair at GB News here. Please keep fighting, and thanks for your time.
Will do.
Angela
Thank you,
Madden,
Martin.
the chair of WASPI Women. Thank you very much for joining us today on GB News. Now, lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock, including we'll be crossing to a boozer in Birmingham to hear how the budget has impacted the drinkers there. But first, here's your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
It's 4:33. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. Rachel Reeves has vowed to invest as she announced one of the biggest tax-raising budgets in a generation and the first for a Labour Chancellor in 15 years. Laying blame on the Conservative Party, who she says failed Britain, she said austerity broke our NHS, Brexit broke businesses and the mini-budget broke the economy. Turning to taxes, the Chancellor confirmed to the Commons that taxes will rise by £40 billion, saying any Chancellor would face the same reality and any responsible Chancellor would take action.
The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services.
However, in his final act as interim leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak slammed Labour's financial plan, claiming it proves the government hasn't been straight with voters. The former Prime Minister claims Sir Keir Starmer and the Chancellor fiddled the figures and that working people will have to pay the price. He said Conservatives warned of Labour's hidden tax and borrowing plans, which he now calls a truth come to light. Here's how Rishi Sunak summed up the Chancellor's budget.
National insurance, up. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up. They have fiddled the figures. I don't like it, Mr. Speaker.
Now, GB News can confirm that there have been 3 migrant deaths in the English Channel today as the number of people crossing illegally hits a new record high. At least 70 migrants were rescued, according to the French Coast Guard. 1 man died at the scene, while a further 2 bodies had been found along the shoreline. GB News can also reveal that 475 Channel migrants arrived in Dover today, taking the total numbers for this year so far to more than 30,350. And the first UK case of a potentially deadly strain of the Mpox virus has been detected in the UK. The UK Health Security Agency says the risk to the UK population remains low. The person involved had been on holiday in Africa and travelled back to London on an overnight flight on October the 21st. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Quite a cloudy afternoon on offer, but there is going to be largely dry with some brighter spells, particularly across the south and east, and feeling mild where you do catch that brighter weather. We've currently got high pressure over the UK, which is dominating our weather through today and for the rest of the week and into the weekend. So conditions not really changing. As we head into this evening, it is going to remain largely dry across the country, mix of cloud and some clear spells, and where we see those clear skies for the longest, some pockets of mist and fog may develop. Turning damp across the northwest of Scotland though, and also across Shetland, so quite a damp morning by the time we reach Thursday, but otherwise remaining fairly mild across the country. To start off tomorrow then, as I say, fairly damp across the northwest Highlands to start off with, as a weak frontal feature just slowly sinks its way towards the southeast of Scotland, and outbreaks of rain for Shetland too, and starting to turn a little bit breezy under that cloud and rain also. For Northern Ireland, Northern England, cloudy, largely dry, though that cloud thick enough to produce some rain and drizzle around hilly areas at times, and elsewhere across England and Wales, a mix of cloud and some brighter spells. Any mist or fog generally clearing away, and as that high pressure sticks around, that leads to us to a rather settled day, though those outbreaks of rain continuing in the northwest of Scotland, once again across the Northern Isles, and fairly breezy around exposed spots too. But once again, where you catch that brighter weather, it should feel fairly mild for this time in October. Now tomorrow it's Halloween, so if you're heading out trick-or-treating, I'm pleased to tell you it's actually going to be largely dry across much of the country, though we are still going to continue to see those outbreaks of rain in the far northwest and still staying fairly breezy here too. But otherwise it is going to be a largely dry evening, just mostly cloudy. And conditions aren't really changing towards the end of the week and into the weekend. Largely dry, cloudy at times, and fairly mild for the time of year.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules. Buckley still queues away from Chester this afternoon with the M56 eastbound, 14 Helsby to Runcorn 12. Big delay still, 2 lanes are out for emergency repairs. The queues back towards Dunkirk, back towards the A494. Major issues for the M25 this afternoon, queues both ways, in particular clockwise the issues. So Enfield 25 to Waltham Abbey 26 is closed. The queues back towards Bignell Corner 23, that's South Mims for investigation work. We're seeing routes around Waltham Cross, heaviest traffic diverts. That's in the roadworks, that collision being investigated. Clockwise is Block 2, Dartford to Darenth, 1B to 2. Heavy back to the QE2 bridge at the scene of a collision. The air ambulance in attendance there, and that means anti-clock traffic being held. Junction 2 at Darenth as well. Big queues there.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:39. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, West Midlands reporter Jack Carson is at the King's Arms Boozer in King's Heath to get reaction to the Chancellor announcing small beers, but nevertheless a 1p cut in a pint on draft duty. Jack, over to you. Are they saying cheers in Birmingham?
Well, you always seem to find me in a pub, Martin, don't you? But let's go at some reaction to that announcement in the budget that draft alcohol duty is going to be reduced by 1.7%. Chancellor saying it's a penny off a pint. We're joined with Harry Higgs, who's the brand manager at Davenport's Brewery. Harry, what's your reaction to that announcement today?
Well, for 195 years, Davenport's been known as the beer with lots of cheer. Unfortunately, after today's budget, there's not much for us or our customers to cheer about. Although any decrease is welcome, 1p I don't think is really going to cut it. The truth and the reality is, with the increase of electric and even when it comes to our own brewery, the brewing costs of grain, the inflation of employment costs, 1p just really isn't going to cut the mustard, and I don't think our customers are really going to feel the full impact of it. It's not going to increase, for instance, people converting from the wine, which has been increased, over to beer for 1p. I mean, you don't see anybody really out there that's going to be jumping up and down in the aisles over it, if I'm honest.
And I suppose winter's always maybe a little bit more of a difficult time because there's not the weather to maybe sit out in a pub garden and have a pint outside in the sun. So do you think this change is going to bring more people into the doors, and do you think this change supports the hospitality industry through the winter months?
I really don't think it's going to have that much of an impact, if I'm honest. And like you said, it's not going to increase footfall with the nights getting darker and colder. If she wanted to make more impact and really help us out as a hospitality industry, I would have personally liked to see something that would have helped the level playing field with the supermarket pricing, rather than just taking a penny off. It's not great news for us.
Yeah, because obviously non-draft duty is going up with the retail price index. Some would see on the surface that is helping to level the playing field, but you don't feel that's the case. There is still a big disparity for you between the supermarkets and the pub.
100%, yeah. And like I said, it's a penny's just. It's nothing. When you look at all the other costs that go into it, it's really not significant enough. And I do think with the relief going from 75% that it currently is down to 40% next year, you're going to see a lot of small businesses within an already struggling hospitality sector really, really struggle next year. And it's not that great.
All right, Harry, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and giving us that reaction to the budget. It might be a penny off a pint, Martin, but not many people in this pub cheersing to that today.
Jack Carlson, every time I see you, you're in a pub, and every time you sign off, you have a swag of it. You're making me jealous. Thank you very much. Excellent there from Birmingham. Let's get back to studio now to my panellists. And that's the former Labour advisor, Mike Buckley, the communications manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and, of course, the legend, the broadcaster, Alastair Stewart. Welcome to the show. Reem, let's start with you. So, small cheers there for the pub industry, but there have been lots of other bad news today that will affect hospitality in particular. Tell us more.
Yeah, so this 1p off of a pint of beer doesn't actually counteract all of the huge tax rises that we're seeing across the sector. The hospitality sector in general are already facing huge amounts of tax rises, and this national insurance contribution is going to affect them with regard to how much they have to pay for their employers. If you're paying a £30,000 a year employer, you're going to have to pay huge amounts more money on national insurance contributions. That ultimately will impact employees. It means they'll have less hires, and ultimately it might result in lower wages. On that particular point about tax in itself, those businesses, the hospitality sector, are going to be impacted as a result of it.
Mike Buckley, there's been a lot of criticism from business owners, from financial experts today about the impact of this budget on small businesses. 25 billion quid in employer national insurance increases. That wasn't mentioned in the Labour manifesto. Capital gains tax, 2.5 billion. Inheritance tax, 2.2 billion. This is like 30 billion quid's worth of tax. It was never mentioned by the Labour Party before the election. Where did all this nightmare come from?
I mean, in terms of hospitality, business rates have been reduced on lots of hospitality businesses, so that is going to have a significant benefit to the sector, and indeed the sector does need help, and I'm sure more help is forthcoming from the government as the government progresses. In terms of the budget overall and the tax increase, as we know from the OBR, they were not given accurate information by the Conservative Party when they were in government. So Labour was approaching power, setting out its stall and setting out its plan for government, but it didn't have access to accurate information because effectively the Conservatives were hiding things. They got into government, they looked in the books as they actually are. They've had to respond to much more difficult circumstances than they anticipated, as well as the challenges that we all know exist in the public sector, primarily the NHS, but also the public services as well. What you've seen today is a very balanced budget that puts significant investments into the NHS, education and other services that make a huge difference to all of our lives. But the tax has increased accordingly, but in a very sustainable way, and I think in a way that actually is, in some cases, much less than was anticipated by some sectors, as indeed seen by the fact that the FTSE's gone up, and indeed lots of shares have gone up because people are thinking this is a good budget rather than a bad budget.
If I could just jump in very, very quickly there, I think that ultimately when we're thinking about this from a wider perspective, we're seeing tax increases overall, about £40 billion of tax rises overall, and at the very, very same time, increases in public spending. So you talk about that capital investment, a lot of that is an investment, a lot of that is day-to-day spending. Talking about the National Health Service, this word invest, we need to be understanding that a lot of the time when politicians say invest, they don't mean invest in the long term in capital. What they they mean is day-to-day public spending. And with the NHS, I'm sorry, but we're throwing huge amounts of taxpayer money into a bureaucratic black hole, and ultimately we're seeing the NHS budget rise without any meaningful change. Do you get better healthcare on the NHS now?
I mean, that simply isn't true. Wes Streeting has been very, very clear that there wouldn't be any more money for the NHS without reform. He is establishing a reform programme for the NHS, which I think we all agree, and I think the NHS would agree is necessary.
Have we heard
I'm
what
sure
those
that
reforms
Wes will
are?
set those things out in due course, but he is in discussion with the NHS managers at this time. But we all know, as users of the service, certainly I do, it doesn't work. It's hellish for most people in this country getting a GP appointment. Our health outcomes do not keep pace with G7 or OECD colleague nations. We need investment in our NHS and we need reform.
Mike Ream, final word has to go to Alastair Stewart. You've seen many of these budgets over the years. As the dust settles on this one, what do you make of it?
I think it's hugely disappointing. I agree with you, though, that it is as advertised in many respects, and I guess in a sense that's what's so disappointing. One thing that we've not talked about, which is of interest to Labour supporters and to the Institute of Economic Affairs, is the talk of huge amounts of money going to support target industries like aerospace, like automotive. In my experience as well, which goes back nearly 50 years as an industrial correspondent, there's one organisation that is absolutely rubbish at picking winners, and that's government, whether it's a Tory government or a Labour government. Markets know best, and I'd be intrigued to know what Labour is going to do to try and help aerospace and automotive. When it came to batteries for electric cars, it was a debacle.
Absolutely.
OK, superb. We have to leave it there. Alastair, Mike and Ream, fantastic. It's an absolute delight
to see you both
in the show. Superb. Great stuff. Now, moving on next, we'll be speaking to the former Tory MP, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, for his reaction to all things budget. I'm suspecting he won't like it much. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Business News Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Young adults spend a few years living away from home at university, those who go to university, but many then have no choice but to move back in with their parents because of the rising cost of renting.
But is this an excuse, and are Gen Z or Z just being lazy?
No, I mean, what do you make of it, Debbie? Because we do have to have some sympathy, don't we, in that, rents are very high, it's very hard to get a mortgage. There are issues there.
I think the push towards young people to go to university as well is not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people. And I think people should start work early. These guys leave their universities with a huge amount of debt, no jobs, or huge rent. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So I think we've got to look at the work ethic and start it younger. Because I think it's so easy just to move back with your mum and dad, isn't it?
To speak like a Gen Zer, they would say that, well, it's OK for your generation, you had it easy.
Realistically, that isn't quite that true, because a lot of people then didn't go to university. This is a relatively new thing that everybody goes to university.
I have to say, what strikes me today is that you still have, amongst all these problems, not having enough money, going to university when perhaps you shouldn't be, all these sort of issues, you still get all these people saying, well, I'm going to have a year out.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think the thing is, they say, oh, it was easy for you, but it wasn't really. We still had to rent places.
But the thing is with this debate, Debbie, is the generation we're talking about, Gen Z, who we're accusing of being lazy, have been raised by our generation.
Yeah.
So what have we done wrong that, if they are lazier, has made them like that?
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app.
From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:51. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, the leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak, reacted to the budget in the Commons today, highlighting broken promise after broken promise. But was he right? Well, joining me now in the studio is, of course, the GB News presenter and the former Conservative MP, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, absolute pleasure, as always. I've got to say, I saw Rishi speak and I thought he was brilliant. Where's that Rishi Sunak been for the last year?
He was absolutely terrific and so powerful and put the case against Red Rachel so strongly and authoritatively. And yes, it's broken promise after broken promise. And they then try and blame it all on Liz Truss, who at least was trying to get some growth, which they're not getting. They have the ABR figures going out to 2029, and it's 1%-ish growth every year bar one. It's hopeless. I'm having Liz on later. She's coming on my programme so she can defend herself and her own record. But Labour has muffed it. This is a terrible budget. It hits anybody who tries to grow the economy. It hits working people. Rachel Reeves herself, as Rishi Sunak pointed out, said that increasing employers' national insurance was a tax on jobs. It's absolutely reckless. And they then want to spend money like it's going out of fashion by increasing the borrowing limits. And the gilt market has already responded and responded unfavourably. The difference between UK rates and German rates has widened, which is a sign that the markets don't believe her.
And yet, of course, as sure as night follows day, they still blame the Conservatives. Do you think if a comet struck the Earth, they blame you lot?
Oh, definitely. It will be entirely our fault. And this is where they've got it so absolutely wrong. They're in charge now. They've talked down the economy since the election. They've devastated confidence. Keir Starmer has had an absolute collapse in his popularity. So I'm so pleased Liz Truss is coming on, because actually, compared to Keir Starmer, people now probably think she's wonderful.
So we've got a quick minute here. Jacob, tease, what's on your show later?
Well, we're going to be talking more about the budget, Labour's dishonesty. Also, very interesting, Guido Fawkes has pointed out this picture of a former Labour minister. She was a Stalin supporter. She was an apologist for Stalin. Now, can you imagine if Rachel Reeves had put up a picture of Oswald Mosley? Because it's the same type of person, the type of person who fell in love with a dictator, praised a dictator, and actually got money from the Soviet Union to pay for one of her trips there. And that's Rachel Reeves' a favourite person. Now, doesn't that tell you something about Red Rachel?
A portrait of what's to come, perhaps. That's 8 till 9 p.m.
8 till 9 p.m.
State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Excellent. Always a pleasure. Now, we're bringing you much more reaction, of course, to the budget, including we'll be speaking to the Deputy Chair of Reform UK, Richard Tice. After this, he'll be with our man, Chris Hope. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. Now, here's your weather with Honor Crissick.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Quite a cloudy afternoon on offer, but there is going to be largely dry with some brighter spells, particularly across the south and east, and feeling mild where you do catch that brighter weather. We've currently got high pressure over the UK, which is dominating our weather through today and for the rest of the week and into the weekend. So conditions not really changing. As we head into this evening, it is going to remain largely dry across the country, a mix of cloud and some clear spells, and where we see those clear skies for the longest, some pockets of mist and fog may develop. Turning damp across the northwest of Scotland, though, and also across Shetland, so quite a damp morning by the time we reach Thursday, but otherwise remaining fairly mild across the country. To start off tomorrow then, as I say, fairly damp across the northwest Highlands to start off with, as a weak frontal feature just slowly sinks its way towards the southeast of Scotland, and outbreaks of rain for Shetland too, and starting to turn a little bit breezy under that cloud and rain also. For Northern Ireland, Northern England, cloudy, largely dry, though that cloud thick enough to produce some rain and drizzle around hilly areas at times, and elsewhere across England and Wales, a mix of cloud and some brighter spells. Any mist or fog generally clearing away, and as that high pressure sticks around, that leads us to a rather settled day, though those outbreaks of rain continuing in the northwest of Scotland, once again across the Northern Isles, and fairly breezy around exposed spots too. But once again, where you catch that brighter weather, it should feel fairly mild for this time in October. Now tomorrow it's Halloween, so if you're heading out trick-or-treating, I'm pleased to tell you it's actually going to be largely dry across much of the country, though we are still going to continue to see those outbreaks of rain in the far northwest and still staying fairly breezy here too. But otherwise it is going to be a largely dry evening, just mostly cloudy. And conditions aren't really changing towards the end of the week and into the weekend. Largely dry, cloudy at times, and fairly mild for the time of year.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon to you. Hello again. I'm Jules Buckley, South Yorkshire. The southbound M18 is currently struggling. There's a breakdown just around the turn-off for the M1 at junction 32 southbound, so slow going and partially blocked. A similar tale eastbound for the M56 away from Chester. 2 lanes are out from 14 to round corner 12, queuing back to the A494 around Dunkirk. There's emergency road repairs there. And big queues for the M25 at the moment. Clockwise is closed from junction 25 Enfield to Waltham Abbey at junction 26. The queue back towards Bignell Corner at 23. In the roadworks, a collision still being investigated. And both sides of the M25, traffic at the moment completely blocked. Dartford 1B to Darrenth at junction 2. Big queues either side, the scene of a collision. Congestion back to Lakeside at 30 and Orpington at 4.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
We could be delivering the perfect Christmas to you this year. First, we'll give you £20,025 in tax-free cash. Then we'll give you £5,000 to spend on all of your Christmas presents, with a further £500 in vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. Finally, a GB News Christmas goodie bag. You'll get it all in time for the big day. For your chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, Chancellor Rachel Rees has dropped a 40 billion quid tax bomb in Labour's first budget for 14 years. But of course, she still blames the Tories.
Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action.
And among those impacted today are small businesses who have been hammered with £25 billion of national insurance tax hikes, and with hikes of 1.2% for all employees and thresholds lowered, as well as an increase in the minimum wage, was today a nightmare on Downing Street for small business owners. And a 10-year plan for Labour is their mission to save the NHS with a £22.6 billion increase in the day-to-day spending.
The largest real terms growth in day-to-day NHS spending outside of COVID since 2010.
And Chancellor Rachel Reeves has also announced more funding for the defence budget.
Today, I am announcing a total increase to the Ministry of Defence's budget of £2.9 billion next year, ensuring that the UK comfortably exceeds our NATO commitments.
And earlier today, Rishi Sunak, he'd had his Weetabix. He blasted Labour's budget, accusing them of fiddling the figures, of breaking promises and imposing £40 billion worth of reckless tax rises. That will make growth less than under his Tory government.
About their inheritance are purely ludicrous. These are her choices. So stop blaming everyone else and take responsibility.
Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. Isn't it astonishing that Rishi Sunak waited until the final day of term to finally show up and put a great shift in? So many of you have been in touch saying, wow, where's that guy been for all the past few months? If he'd have been putting a shift, maybe there wouldn't have been a general election this early, or actually the Tories might have had a better chance of not getting swept out of power. But look, that's enough from me. What do you make of today's budget? Have you been a winner? Have you been a loser? Have you seen today a massive tax hike that wasn't in that manifesto? Has that hammered you? Get into its usual ways. GBNews.com/you'll say. But before we kick off the rest of the hour, it's your headlines, and here's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. It's just gone 5 o'clock. These are your headlines. Rachel Reeves has vowed to invest as she announced one of the biggest tax-raising budgets in a generation and the first for a Labour Chancellor in 15 years. Laying blame on the Conservative Party, who she says failed Britain, she said austerity broke our NHS, Brexit broke businesses and the mini-budget broke the economy. Turning to taxes, the Chancellor confirmed to the Commons that taxes will rise by £40 billion, saying any Chancellor would face the same reality and any responsible Chancellor would take action.
The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion. Any Chancellor standing here today would have to face this reality. And any responsible Chancellor would take action. That is why today I am restoring stability to our public finances and rebuilding our public services.
However, in his final act as interim leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak slammed Labour's financial plan, claiming it proves the government hasn't been straight with voters. The former Prime Minister claims Sir Keir Starmer and the Chancellor fiddled the figures and that working people will have to pay the price. He said Conservatives warned of Labour's hidden tax and borrowing plans, which he now calls a truth come to light. Here's how Rishi Sunak summed up the Chancellor's budget.
National insurance, up. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up. They have fiddled the figures. I don't like it, Mr. Speaker.
Meanwhile, the Liberal Democrats are very concerned, according to the Deputy Leader of the party, Daisy Cooper. She spoke to GB News earlier and said Labour should be raising tax on big tech companies, not small businesses and pensioners.
We're very concerned that the big burden of that particular measure is going to fall on small businesses and on the employees as well. We said repeatedly during the general election campaign, we said repeatedly since, that we think that there are other ways that the government could be raising taxes, looking to raise taxes on the big banks, on the big tech companies. Those are the kind of places where you should be raising tax, not on small businesses, not on hard-working, struggling families, not on pensioners and not on family farms either.
Now, GB News can confirm that there have been 3 migrant deaths in the English Channel today, as the number of people crossing illegally hits a new record high. At least 70 migrants were rescued, according to the French Coast Guard. 1 man died at the scene, while a further 2 bodies have been found along the shoreline. GB News can also reveal that 475 Channel migrant arrivals in Dover today, taking the total numbers for the year so far to more than 30,350. The first UK case of a potentially deadly strain of the Mpox virus has been detected in London. The UK Health Security Agency says the risk to the UK population remains low. The person involved had been on holiday in Africa and travelled back to London on an overnight flight on October the 21st. And just days before the US election, footage has surfaced of President Biden appearing to call Trump supporters garbage.
And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
The White House insists he was targeting hateful rhetoric used against Puerto Ricans at a recent Trump event. But Republicans and Trump's campaign have condemned the comments. Seizing on the controversy, Trump accused Democrats of running a campaign of hate. Meanwhile, with polls showing the race is still neck and neck, Vice President Kamala Harris is urging Americans to turn the page on drama and conflict. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, in the last half an hour, the Chancellor has weighed in and given his verdict on the budget. The former Chancellor, that is Jeremy Hunt, as he called the tax rises incredibly damaging. Let's take a listen.
Well, this is not a debate about getting more funding for the NHS and public services. They need more money. We found more money when we were in power. We fully recognise that. The choice is whether you find that extra money through tax rises that are incredibly damaging to the economy, or whether you're prepared to take difficult decisions on welfare reform, public sector productivity, and find the money a different way. The result of what the government has done today in these very damaging tax rises for ordinary families, it's going to mean lower wages, higher mortgages, higher prices, living standards going down. That's according to their own economic watchdog, the OBR. And that just goes to show that, when the Labour government puts up taxes, however they dress it up, it's ordinary families that pay the price.
Well, absolutely no surprise that Jeremy Hunt is not remotely happy. And joining me now is our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, welcome back to the show. It's been an action-packed day, and no surprises whatsoever that Jeremy Hunt is fuming.
Yeah, he really is. And maybe some viewers and listeners of GB News might be a bit confused about this government, because back in June this year, I interviewed Sir Keir Starmer and I asked him about tax rises. And this is what he had to say then, Martin.
We have been very clear that for working people, we are not going to increase their taxes. So that means we are not increasing income tax, national insurance or VAT. And that is because I think the burden on working people is too high. The tax burden under this government is at a 70-year high. And that is why our plans are fully costed, fully funded. They do not involve tax rises over and above the ones that we've set out in relation to non-dom status, private equity, loopholes, VAT on private schools, and of course a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. So they're the rises we will put in place. But we have not announced today anything over and above what we've pre-announced. So none of the plans today in our manifesto for growth, for wealth creation, require us to raise other taxes.
But you're still raising. Well, there you have. I thought it was worth playing that out, Martin, because that's what Sir Keir Starmer said as Labour leader. No tax rises over and above what's in the manifesto. I think many might think that £40 billion was not what they voted for, certainly with that big increase of £25 billion on national insurance, employers' contributions. When they say no increase in national insurance, I think many felt that would include all of those measures, but there we are. They're saying that employees and workers are not being affected. With me now is the Deputy Leader of the Reform UK Party, Richard, you're shaking your head. Why?
I mean, this was a deeply socialist budget, the most socialist we've ever had in our lifetime. Taxes up 40 billion, spending up 60 billions of pounds. They've cooked the books, fiddled the books. The bond markets have reacted badly last week and this week since the budget. And the forecast from what I call the Office of Incompetent Forecasting, the OBR, frankly, they're fantasy land. Growth is down, and this is a very scary, risky budget. It's bad for growth, it's bad for small businesses, it's bad for entrepreneurs, and it's bad for working people because everybody's going to pay more tax at every single level, and the public sector will waste it.
Well, you don't know that. They may not waste.
Look at the track record. Look, we're spending 200 billion a year after inflation, more than in 2019, and yet the public sector outcomes are worse and worse. Productivity's down.
You know that NHS concern polls very highly. They're raising 40 billion. They're spending 22 billion on the NHS over 2 years. Isn't that what the public wants, Richard Tice?
Well, actually, we were planning in our contract at the election to spend more than that, but on independent healthcare, because Wes Streeting, the health secretary, promised to get reform by using independent healthcare. They seem to have abandoned all that. What will happen is if this is poured into the NHS black hole, which is receiving more money than it's ever received, by the way, for the worst outcomes, then actually waiting lists will remain high. Nothing will change. We'll be here in 2 years' time, and they say they want another 20 billion and another 20 billion. No, healthcare needs reform. So yes, it needs more money in healthcare, but in a different way.
Rachel Reeves is saying that departments must cut spending by 2% across the board. Some are protected. I'm sure the NHS will be protected from that. So she is trying to find those savings, isn't she?
It's ridiculous. We said you've got to save £5 at 100. You can easily do that. I'm approached by doctors and nurses in the NHS every week talking about the waste, the inefficiency, the mismanagement, the bureaucracy. Even the health secretary agreed with me a few weeks ago in the House of Commons that the management was poor. So look, it needs fundamental reform at every level, but fundamentally, this budget is risky, it's scary, it's an assault on jobs, and it's an assault on hard work, and it's an assault on small businesses.
The OBR, the official forecast of the Treasury, says that net migration will stay at over 300,000 between now and the end of the decade. What do you make of that?
And that's a best case scenario. So worst case, it could be up at 750,000 every year. And that means that actually we all get poorer per person. Because if you look at the growth forecasts, those have come down, and per person we'll be lucky to flatline. May even get poorer, which is what is literally happening as we speak. So we're desperately concerned. And of course, the more people you have, guess what? The more pressure on housing and healthcare, and things get worse.
There's some signs being held up behind you by protesters. They just walked away, thank goodness. Some are forecasting that the low growth forecast might mean the next election is a rejoin election, that people might think we're better off back in the European Union.
Well, a European Union led by Germany that's in a deep recession at the moment. Their automotive industry is desperately struggling. Forget it. I mean, Germany is in serious, serious trouble. And I think people will look at that and say, you know, what's going on there? They've got the same immigration issues, the same mad net zero issues, the same high tax, high regulation, low growth issues. Thank heavens we're out of the EU, but now we've got to deregulate, reduce taxes, stop wasting huge amounts of money, scrap net zero and go for growth.
Yep. And just finally, while I've got you, this weekend the Tory party chooses its new leader, Kevin Badenoch or Robert Jenrick. Which one does Reform UK fear?
Thank heavens it's over. I mean, honestly, what a pantomime. No one cares. I mean, the likelihood of whoever's the winner leading the Conservatives into the next election is remote. And we're focusing on growing reform. We've got the momentum behind us. Looking forward to the May elections across England next year, Scottish and Welsh elections in 2026. And we're polling well, we're making progress, branches are growing, membership's growing.
So which one, Kevin Badenoch or Robert Jenrick? Who do you fear?
Either of them. I'm focusing on what reform is doing, our response. I've spoken lots in the House of Commons, and we're making a real noise. 5 of us, frankly, we're achieving more than 120 Tory MPs.
Okay. Richard Tice there, the Deputy Leader of the Reform UK party, saying he couldn't care less who leads the Tory party, and he's very, very concerned about the budget, Martin.
Thank you very much, Chris O. Thank you very much, Richard Tice. And thank goodness, Steve Bray, someone put a sock in his megaphone. Let's get back to the studio here and bring in my panellists. That's the former Labour advisor, Mike Buckley, the communications manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and, of course, the journalist and the legend, the broadcaster, Alastair Stewart. Alastair, let's start with you. You were nodding profusely there when Richard Tice was talking about the NHS. 22.6 billion quid chucked into the bucket again. A lot of people saying the bucket is leaking. Why keep throwing more into it? Is the answer something more radical? Does the NHS need more radical surgery instead of just endlessly throwing money at the same system?
Yes, absolutely. And one other thing I was nodding at was that Richard was claiming, and I don't have any reason to doubt him at all, that he said people in his party are contacted day in, day out by men and women who are at the front line of the NHS. And given what I've been through with my dementia, let's give a public hurrah for them. Yes. From hospitals to my GP. Brilliant. But they all say if you just chuck money at it, it'll be spent. There is an insatiable appetite within the NHS, ageing population, new drugs being discovered, etc., etc. You've got to take one step back and sit down with really good people like the King's Fund and some of the unions and say, how can we make each pound really get value for money for the taxpayer? And I'm sure it can do a much better job. Alan Meale, who I knew very well as a former Health Secretary way back, who was the one who's told me on one of my programmes, our relationship with the private sector is not a one-night stand. They can learn a lot from the private sector, and there's still a lot more to learn.
Let's bring Mike Buckley in at this point, if we can, former Labour advisor. Tony Blair started the movement towards, a closer relationship with private partnerships. Wes Streeting seems to want more of it, but of course the problem will be the Labour left. Will it be allowed to do that? The system seems broken. Chucking endless money at it hasn't worked. Waiting lists are getting longer. Outcomes are getting worse and poorer. You've got to do something more radical to the NHS than just chucking endless money at it.
I mean, one thing you don't need to worry about is the Labour left, because Keir Starmer's been very clear that they don't have a role in the future of the Labour Party or this government, and indeed he's removed the whip from 7 left-wing MPs, very soon after he got it in.
The unions might not like it, though, the healthcare unions.
Well, I've talked to the unions regularly. They're all, the vast majority of them anyway, incredibly supportive. The government wanted to succeed. Wes Streeting has great plans for the NHS. He's very aware that it needs reform. He's said that on many occasions over the last few years since he was appointed as Shadow and now as Health Secretary. He knows that reform has to go in combination with funding increases. Admittedly, that the headline amount of money going into the NHS did increase over the last 14 years, but that's just inflation. They didn't get any real terms increases.
No, even in real terms,
excuse me, let me finish. This is doing nothing to match an ageing population and more complicated health needs. Nothing to match what Labour was putting in. Labour was putting in a 6% increase when it was in power in the 90s and the 2000s. Over the last 14 years, there was basically 0% increase under Cameron, May. Johnson actually did increase the amount a little bit, as did Rishi Sunak, but nowhere near to recompense for the lost funding under Cameron and May, and nothing to recompense for the fact we've got an ageing population, which means as a proportion of the population, more older people living longer, that's expensive. It's got to be paid for.
The National
Health
in partnership with
reform.
reform.
Very well, as we all do, how this thing works. And Wes, who I thought made a very good start and impressed a lot of people right across the political spectrum, lost a golden opportunity when he backed the pay review board settlement for the nurses and the junior doctors without striking a meaningful reform deal with them.
What he did do was end strikes, which is necessary.
He didn't give a penny away in pay without a deal.
Increasing spending on pay. The point with the National Health Service is that effectively we spend just below £200 billion a year on it, and yet at the same time we are not seeing those health outcomes improve. I completely disagree, and I think that, Alastair, we need to go even further. We don't need to just be talking to the King's Fund and talking to people on the front line. We need to look at other countries in the world that have actual meaningful reforms within their health systems. I think we need to get rid of the National Health Service in its entirety and implement a social health insurance model, as we have in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Sweden, in Denmark, in most European countries, where you have public and private partnerships, where patients, British people, are able to choose where they get their healthcare from.
And give them tax relief if they're prepared to take the burden on their own shoulders out of their earned incomes.
And actually, that is a policy that Nigel Farage has been trumpeting for years, and Richard Tice. Wes Streeting seems to be receptive to a more progressive private public partnership. But I put to you again that he won't be allowed to do that. I don't believe he will be allowed to do that by the Royal College of Nursing, but by the health unions. They won't stand by and let our NHS, the church of the NHS, be modified in that manner.
Wes has been very clear since he became Shadow Health Secretary quite a long time ago that he is interested in outcomes, improving the health of the population. He's interested in improving healthcare outside of hospitals, moving healthcare outside of hospitals to GPs and to in community forms, also to prevention, putting much more money into prevention, which will stop people getting in the first place, as well as improving GP appointments and hospital care as well, but making a system that works. And I trust that he'll do that. He's also been very clear that he wants to do that, obviously with the NHS, with reform, but also working in partnership with the private sector. I mean, moving to a social insurance model, just changing the way that we fund our healthcare, isn't going to make anybody better or improve anybody's outcomes.
I'll tell you exactly why, because you actually have competition between health providers. So
that isn't going to make anything better, it just makes it more expensive,
no, it doesn't.
as we've seen in every other privatisation, which is why we're now having to renationalise things like the railways.
Mike, look across Europe. The reason why no other country has a national health service is because it doesn't work. It's a government monopoly. There is absolutely no competition. There is no incentive for improvement. No incentive for efficiencies. We need to look at European countries that have actually implemented those kind of reforms.
One of those countries two very quick examples.
They do, but they have competition.
So what you're asking examples of the public to pay more. NHS in the UK, and it's a thing that we've had personal experience of in our family. Frimley Park Hospital and Basingstoke Hospital both have private units within them, and if they make a surplus revenue, what we used to call profit in the old days, it goes to the NHS in effect as rent. And everybody who works there that my wife and I spoke to gave it the thumbs up, because they're all working together, they're all health professionals, they respect each other's privacy, they respect that some are paid by a private company and some are paid by the taxpayer, but they share and it works brilliantly. That's Frimley Park and Basingstoke.
Absolutely excellent. We have to leave it there. Spirited, healthy debate to start this hour. Fabulous. Alastair, Mike, Reem, we have to move on. Superb. Now we're crossing to South Shields next to hear how the North East has reacted to this budget. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
The Daily Mail now, Josh, and pub landlords have to worry about more than the optics when it comes to offensive banter, it seems.
This is a really big story and important. Pub landlords could have to become banter cops to stop themselves being sued by staff offended by comments from customers under workers' rights reform. So, Labour, when they were part of their election process, they were like, we're going to reform workers' rights, and that all sounds good on paper, but there were issues in terms of how might it affect employees and fear from employees costing them more money. One of these things that they're sort of pushing through, though, is that in the Equality Act of 2010, part of the issue was that if you were offended at work or someone said something sexist or racist, something that affected you, the employer had to take some sort of... they had three chances to kind of take action. Now, the employer has to should have taken action already. So employees can sue employers. Now, this has a big impact on us because we're comics and we perform in venues. And if some of the bar staff hear a joke that they don't like, then they can sue their employer, potentially, under this legislation.
So it's not punters?
Well, also, it could be like you're at a bar and some bloke is like, oh, I like that top, or whatever. That's not good behaviour. But the point is now that employee could sue their employer.
So, because, I mean, the sort of scenario I was imagining was that a barmaid was being maybe sexually harassed or
That's
something.
what they're focusing in this article, but other articles have gone down the free speech route. And also venues and universities having lectures. We saw it at, in Edinburgh Fringe Festival and Sadowitz. He had a show cancelled not because of any punters, but because two of the 18-year-olds were working. They were upset.
There was a bar in Brighton, wasn't there? There was a story we covered a few weeks ago. A bar in Brighton threw some people out. Because
exactly. They had turfs on the...
turfs.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:25. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, moments ago, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, reacted to today's budget announcement. And as you can imagine, he's not remotely happy. And here's what he had to say.
Any business employing 5 or more people has today been hammered. And I make the point that I've set up companies and run companies. Nobody on the front bench has ever worked in private business. Nobody on the front bench understands what genuine risk capital is. Our business secretary, from what I can make out, has never even had a job. But the most dismal part, no, I've had plenty of jobs. Well, apart from being in the European Parliament, which doesn't really count, obviously. But I got to tell you, what is dismal about this budget is the growth forecast. If the ambition of our Chancellor is that in 4 years' time growth should be 1.5%, that is very, very bad news for everybody, and particularly because it takes no account of the rise in population that will happen through legal immigration. It basically means a rise of 0. And nobody's even mentioned today the fact that gross domestic product per capita, wealth per capita, has been falling consistently nearly every single quarter for the last 2 years. The bigger our population becomes, the poorer we are becoming. And that's a reality we've got to wake up to. But I would say this.
Well, that's Nigel Farage in what I would call vintage Brussels mode. And let's go now to our GB News presenter, Emily Carver, who's been up in the South Shields area speaking to people regarding the budget. Emily, what's the mood on the ground?
Thanks, Martin. Yes, we've been in South Shields all day. The darkness is coming in, the evening is drawing in, but we've been speaking to all types of people up here in South Shields. Why are we here? Well, of course, it's lovely in the northeast, and we've got the wonderful Sandhaven Beach as well, but it's also a traditionally working class area, coal mines, you've got the shipbuilding as well, and we've been speaking to people who've been here for generations. What do they make of the Labour budget? Well, firstly, I had a word with Mike Ford, who's a local business person. Let's hear what he had to say.
I've seen the lies from Rachel Reeves today in Parliament. I was absolutely shocked, if I'm honest.
And what stands out for you then? What lies are you talking about?
All the build up to the general election. We will not raise taxes just to try and get a hold of the last few remaining Labour supporters who were balancing towards reform or other, and they've just spat in the face of all those today, and it's shameful, if I'm honest.
So Mike Ford clearly is not convinced that the Labour government has his back, and he's claiming that the Labour government have told many lies from the manifesto onwards. But I also spoke to a local primary school teaching assistant who had this to say, Joe McHugh.
Well, those taxes that are being paid are to support families and children, and it needs to be at that baseline point for children because they are going to be our working future.
Yeah, and talking about the children, are some of the children that you work with at school, are some of their families really struggling at the moment with the cost of living? You talk about breakfast clubs. Do you feel like they really need that?
It's rather than it being like, yes, they're called breakfast clubs, but it's more about the timing of it so that parents can actually get into work rather than the feeding the children, although that is something that is supplied while they're there.
So there you go. That's what it's all been about today up in South Shields, getting a variety of views. We heard from a local businessman who owns one of the oldest restaurants here in South Shields a little bit earlier. He said the wage bill, minimum wage, national insurance contributions, all of that isn't going to help his business. He's a bit worried about the future. But we've spoken to a huge number of people, a little bit of brightness for the schools, welcoming that those extra billions into schools and those breakfast clubs. But of course, we'll be back here. I'll be in Durham tomorrow. I'll be in Stanley again to revisit some of those people who were very worried about the winter fuel payment. But back to you, Martin.
Emily, thank you very, very much. Excellent insight there on the ground in South Shields. Thank you very, very much for that. Let's get back for a quick blast with my panel. Mike, I'd like to go to you as a former Labour advisor. South Shields there. This is a dyed-in-the-wool Labour seat. It's been Labour forever, although, interestingly, Reform came second at the last general election with a decreased margin. These are people who should be voting in the Labour Party all day long. Business owners, teachers, school mums, they're not at all happy with the budget today.
Well, I mean, I'd be interested to see how many people your colleagues spoke to today who were happy with the budget and didn't appear on your TV show. But I don't know the answer to that.
GBNews.
I wouldn't dream of doing so. But it was interesting to hear what they had to say, of course. But I think it's particularly interesting that the school clubs were mentioned, the breakfast clubs, which was a brilliant thing, and it's going to increase, people's ability to pay attention in class. It's going to improve health amongst kids,
is it
which of course is going to have
to feed kids.
Well, of course, it is in a world where there's such gross inequality because of the horrendous mistakes that were made by the last government for 14 years.
Why should middle-class
the inequality
children
and poverty in this country is horrendous because we live in a civilised society, and we want all of our children.
Children of millionaires be paid for by average taxpayers.
I think it's entirely right that every kid gets the opportunity to have. Because we live in a civilised society, we want all our children, young people in this country, to have the best chance in life.
I mean, this is literally the most.
And if you don't agree with that, then you don't agree with the majority of people in the country, you don't agree with me, you certainly don't agree with this government, which is making the right choices for the children in this country.
On this particular policy. Martin, the point is, this is a politics of redistribution, and this particular budget is effectively austerity for the private sector. The government are continuously taking more and more of hard-earned taxpayer cash and spending it on people that, frankly, don't need it. The national insurance contribution rise, I think, is a really excellent example of this, and it harks back to a very key principle of tax policy. Just because you are taxing employers doesn't mean it's employers that are bearing the brunt of those costs. It's the tax incidents. It's people like employees that are going to feel these kind of tax rises in the form of lower wages, in the form of higher prices as consumers, and in the form of less people being hired. The minimum wage is a great example of this. Smaller businesses are going to be hurt, and younger people are going to be less likely to be hired.
Thank you very much. And the final word before the news goes to you, Alastair Stewart, on this topic.
I genuinely don't think it's that much about a blow because it's redistributive, because I think I associate redistribution with higher income taxes and then spreading it out through welfare benefits and the rest of it. What I do think it is, and it's the fundamental final point from me, Martin, and thank you for having me in conversation with you and your guests, is that it is a tax across the board on creativity and on invention and on wealth creation. And if you damage wealth creation, you've got nothing to redistribute anyway. End of story.
Great. So Alastair, Mike, Reem, thank you very much for now. Lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including a former SAS man's reaction to the Chancellor boosting the defence budget by nearly £3 billion. But first is your latest news headlines with Sophia Wenser.
Martin, thank you. It's 5:33. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. Rachel Reeves has announced one of the biggest tax-raising budgets in a generation and the first for the Labour Chancellor in 15 years. First, a 6.7% increase to the minimum wage, bringing it to £12.21, and a rise in national insurance for employers to 15%. VAT will be introduced on private school fees in 2025, while non-dom tax status is set to be abolished. Capital gains tax will rise, with the lower rate moving from 10% to 18%. And inheritance tax thresholds will be frozen until 2030. A £2.3 billion boost goes to schools, with tripled funding for breakfast clubs, and an additional £2.9 billion will also be directed to the Ministry of Defence. Meanwhile, in other news, the Prime Minister has criticised both Conservative leadership candidates' comments on the Southport stabbings that left 3 young girls dead after concerns information on the attack was concealed. Sir Keir Starmer warned MPs they can either support the police in their difficult work on the Southport case or undermine it. It comes as Axel Rudikabana has appeared in court charged with terror and biological weapons offences. The 18-year-old appeared via video link at Westminster Magistrates Court to answer the new charges, including making the deadly toxin ricin and possessing an Al-Qaeda terror manual. Despite the new charges, police haven't classified the incident as a terrorist attack. Rudikabana will return to court next month on the 13th of November. GB News can confirm that there have been 3 migrant deaths in the English Channel today as the number of people crossing illegally hits a new record high. At least 70 migrants were rescued, according to the French Coast Guard. 1 man died at the scene, while a further 2 bodies had been found along the shoreline. GB News can also confirm that 475 Channel migrants arrived in Dover today, taking the total number so far this year to more than 30,350. And the first UK case of a potentially deadly strain of the Mpox virus has been detected in London. The UK Health Security Agency says the risk to the UK population remains low. The person involved had been on holiday in Africa and travelled back to London on an overnight flight on October the 21st. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2991 and €1.1967. The price of gold is £2,145 and 24 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's closed the day at 8,159 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, it's my favourite time of the show. I'm now joined by Michelle Dewberry, the queen of prime-time political debate. Dewes, what's on your menu?
Well, of course, the big B. It is the main topic in town today, isn't it? The budget. I've been speaking to lots of viewers today, so I'll be bringing them into the conversation. But also, I've got former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng keeping me company. I've got former Labour Minister Bill Rammell. And also, you've just been hearing Nigel Farage in your show there saying that these people have never ran a business. So guess what? I've got one of Britain's best entrepreneurs joining me. He's got over 1,000 staff. So I want to ask him, what's this going to mean then for businesses? Because national insurance, for example, is massive, those increases. Is it going to be passed on to the staff? Is it going to be passed on to us, consumers? Is it going to impact wages? What will the future look like?
Superb stuff, Dewes and Co. Michelle Dewberry always, of course, does the business. 6 till 7, Dewes and Co. Now, still to come, we'll be crossing to a military veteran for his reaction to the budget news, and that's coming next.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Quite a cloudy afternoon on offer, but there is going to be largely dry with some brighter spells, particularly across the south and east, and feeling mild where you do catch that brighter weather. We've currently got high pressure over the UK, which is dominating our weather through today and for the rest of the week and into the weekend. So conditions not really changing. As we head into this evening, it is going to remain largely dry across the country, a mix of cloud and some clear spells, and where we see those clear skies for the longest, some pockets of mist and fog may develop. Turning damp across the northwest of Scotland though, and also across Shetland, so quite a damp morning by the time we reach Thursday, but otherwise remaining fairly mild across the country. To start off tomorrow then, as I say, fairly damp across the northwest Highlands to start off with, as a weak frontal feature just slowly sinks its way towards the southeast of Scotland, and outbreaks of rain for Shetland too, and starting to turn a little bit breezy under that cloud and rain also. For Northern Ireland, Northern England, cloudy, largely dry, though that cloud thick enough to produce some rain and drizzle around hilly areas at times, and elsewhere across England and Wales, a mix of cloud and some brighter spells. Any mist or fog generally clearing away, and as that high pressure sticks around, that leads us to a rather settled day, though those outbreaks of rain continuing in the northwest of Scotland, once again across the Northern Isles, and fairly breezy around exposed spots too. But once again, where you catch that brighter weather, it should feel fairly mild for this time in October. Now, tomorrow it's Halloween, so if you're heading out trick-or-treating, I'm pleased to tell you it's actually going to be largely dry across much of the country, though we are still going to continue to see those outbreaks of rain in the far northwest and still staying fairly breezy here too. But otherwise, it is going to be a largely dry evening, just mostly cloudy. And conditions aren't really changing towards the end of the week and into the weekend. Largely dry, cloudy at times, and fairly mild for the time of year.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Problems in South Yorkshire continue for the M18. The motorway is partly blocked southbound where it meets the M1. That's where a lorry's broken down. There are long queues heading east along the M56 through Cheshire. Now, 2 lanes on that stretch of the motorway closed between Chester services and the Runcorn turn off junction 14 to 12. Emergency repair works are taking place on the carriageway. And in Oxfordshire, just west of Tame, the A418 remains shut between Tiddington and North Western at the scene of a 4-vehicle collision. Queues back to the M40. The M25 closed in 2 places. First of all, clockwise from junction 25 to 26, right on the Essex border between the A10 and Waltham Abbey for accident investigation work, and also clockwise in Kent. It's closed from junction 1B at Dartford to 2 at the A2 for investigation work, causing long queues on the approaches. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 5:41. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Rachel Reeves is to hand the armed forces a funding boost of almost £3 billion in today's budget. But she did dodge calls to increase spending to 2.5% of GDP. Let's take a listen to what she had to say earlier on today.
Today, I am announcing a total increase to the Ministry of Defence's budget of £2.9 billion next year. Ensuring that the UK comfortably exceeds our NATO commitments.
So is this enough ammo for the armed forces? Well, joining me now is the military veteran and the former SAS warrant officer, Matthew Hellier, who's always an absolute delight to have on the show. Matthew, £3 billion sounds a lot on paper, but that's about less than a fifth of what the government is giving to overseas foreign climate aid. Was it enough?
Was it enough? It's never enough, especially when the MOD are looking at a nearly £1 billion in the red. I mean, that £3 billion is OK. Think about it now. We have flawed systems within the MOD that need to be overhauled. We have a recruitment and a procurement procedure which is just broken. You know, the people, the civil servants that are supporting the MOD, we need to do a review on this. We cannot keep going on having a £1 billion deficit in the MOD.
Matthew Hellier and Nigel Farage just blasted in Parliament saying the problem with the Labour front bench is that none of them understand business. None of them have ever done a day's work in their life. That's what he said. Do you think there's a similar issue with the armed forces? People, successive governments don't really seem to understand the military.
I mean, there's some really real huge gaps within the military. One example is that we use the big companies like Deloitte and companies like that to come and backfill into the military. We use those people as think tanks, but the people they actually send into the military to advise from us are the people that have just left the military. We spend thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds on our young university grads. We put them through a commissioning school at Sandhurst. They spend 3 years and go and join Deloitte. And you know, the next thing they do, they come and advise on the military and talk about how we should do things better. Do you know what I say? Well, let's look at our young academics that are already in the military. They're the people that we should be backing up. They're the people that we should be funding. They're the people that should be making the changes for the military, not the civil servants on the outskirts that have not got a clue about what happens.
Matthew, I thought there you're about to get me in trouble and say, do you know what I was about to say to them? And I thought you were going to give it the unfiltered version, so thanks for not doing that. Have you got any faith that things may change with this government? I mean, we seem to find endless billions for Ukraine. What about back in Blighty?
Yeah, we need it back in Blighty, but don't forget we are fighting a proxy war in Ukraine. Whether that's the right word or not, that is what is happening. Russia are on our doorsteps. We've just seen pictures of North Korean troops training in Russia. We have China upholding their military strategy against us all. We have a lot of people on our doorsteps. Number one, we need that £3 billion. We need to uplift our military. We need to be serious in this world now, because in a couple of years we will be at war. Mark my words.
And what do you think that war's going to look like? I mean, do we need boots on the ground? Is it like more of a tech-based war? Will it be some things so remote and perhaps even so immediate it bears not even thinking about?
Yeah, a bit of both, really. Warfare is technical, but we can switch off technology. And as soon as we switch off technology, we always need the infanteers, the boots on the ground to go and clear up the mess. OK, so we need to invest in our soldiers. We need better pensions, more recruitment, better retention. That's where that money has got to be looked at. That is where the money should be going.
OK, thank you very much. It's always an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. That's the military veteran and former SAS warrant officer Matthew Hedier. Thank you very, very much. Now, let's bring in my panellists back here in the studio. Former Labour advisor Mike Buckley, comms manager at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and, of course, the journalist, the broadcaster, the legend, Alastair Stewart. Let's start with you, if I could, Mike. Is that enough money, £3 billion? You just heard there from a former SAS man. I wouldn't argue with him. He says it's not enough.
I mean, I think we're all very aware that we live in an increasingly unstable world, obviously, given what's going on between Russia and Ukraine and has been for 2.5 years now. The crisis in the Middle East, which is very, very sadly ongoing, the war in Sudan, the uncertainty over the impact of the US election, the continuing belligerence of Russia and, sabre-rattling towards the EU and NATO. So we obviously need to be increasing our defence spending, and we need to be using that money incredibly well. The rise in spending that Rachel Reeves set out today takes defence spending to 2.3% of GDP, which is a significant increase, and is a big down payment also moving us towards that 2.5% target.
OK, whether that got a very short amount of time. Can I get a quick word, please, from Rees?
Yes, no, I actually broadly agree with Mike. I think that when we're thinking about public sector spending and the way in which we spend in the public sector, defence is one of those areas that definitely needs a lot more of that money. But in the grand scheme of things, this isn't a lot. I would say within the wider sector, we need to be thinking about where the money is coming from in the first place. I would cut other areas of public spending so that we can spend more on defence.
And final word has to go to you, Alastair. Is Britain safer under Labour, would you say?
As the son of an Air Force officer and a Royal Navy Wren, I welcome that commitment. I don't know whether we are safer or not. Defence reviews come around every now and then and try and look at the nature of the enemy and the nature of the challenge. I'll tell you one thing that Rachel talked about a lot during her speech earlier today and this afternoon, and that is value for money and efficiencies. And the Ministry of Defence is supremely inefficient and bad at spending huge amounts of money. I mean, the waiting times to get anything done, aircraft carriers that cost billions, and then the screw falls off or something like that. That really does need a shake-up urgently, otherwise that'll be another £2.9 billion wasted.
Superb. Alastair, Reem, Mike, great stuff. And that's all for now. We are now going to, still to come, we'll be hearing from the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, Labour MP James Murray. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Business News Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Millions are struggling to stay warm with the wet weather, the cost of living and, of course, cuts to fuel payments.
Yes, winter is fast approaching, so it's crucial to find cost-effective ways to save on your energy expenses while staying reasonably warm.
So joining us to provide advice on heating your home, or at least staying warm somehow, is one of the leading voices on lowering energy bills, Nick Miles. And you are very welcome in here this morning. I mean, a lot of people say, well, in the olden days, you just used to put on an extra jumper. But actually, it's more serious than that, isn't it? What is the best way, the most cost-effective way to keep your home warm?
Some of the bigger things is we need to do more things on insulating our properties, but actually sometimes, it can be simple things like turning down a thermostat. Those that have got the luxury of being able to afford energy bills and keep their homes on the thermostat a bit too high. If you just turn it down by one simple degree, as long as you keep it between 18 and 22 degrees, can save up to 5 to 10% of your energy bill. So that's a kind of a very simple way of doing things. But, it can be other little tips and tricks you can do as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I always get it when people say about this, but like 18 degrees is not warm for a house.
No, and it's twofold actually. It's that kind of relative temperature, but also it's the kind of drafts and things you have in your house. So it's the comfort factor. So what we have a lot of old properties in our country. You've got some 8 million hard-to-treat properties built before World War II that have got poor insulation, but also very, very drafty. So it's the temperature and it's the kind of the draftiness of them that kind of keeps us uncomfortable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Time is 5:51. I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. Now, joining me now in the studio is the Exchequer to the Treasury, the Labour MP, James Murray. James, welcome to the studio. Thank you for your time. So the first Labour budget in 14 years, and it contained an astonishing £40 billion of tax hikes, an historic high, and many of them, most of them, weren't in the budget. Have you been, as Rishi Sunak said, fiddling the books?
What we've been doing is setting out today a budget that I would describe as a once-in-a-generation budget. This was a budget that needed to restore stability to the public finances by making sure that we can pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts, as the Chancellor's first fiscal rule. It's one that set out to fix the foundations of the NHS and public services, and it's one that really prioritises investment. Investment in our country to make sure that we can get that growth, particularly in the long term, to make sure that we're not taking short-term decisions, but we're building a long-term future for the country. That's what this budget was about for me.
It's been painful for small business owners. We've heard from many of them throughout the show today. £25 billion in national insurance increases and employers. That's going to mean no pay rises. It's going to mean potentially hiring less people, more people dragged into tax. It's not a pro-business budget.
Well, raising employer national insurance is a difficult decision. It's one that we think is necessary to ask businesses to make that contribution towards the NHS, towards the public finances, towards getting our country back on the right footing. The million smallest businesses are protected because we've increased the employment allowance, which helps them to mean they don't pay any more, or some of them even gain from the changes we've made. So we're protecting the smallest businesses, but we need to be upfront about this. We inherited a real mess, not least the £22 billion black hole that we, the OBR, none of us knew about before the election. We have to fix the foundations. We have to get stability back in the public finances, and that's why we set out this budget today.
Is the capital gains tax rate, £2.5 billion there, is that a cap on aspiration?
No, it's asking people to make a fair contribution. The change in capital gains was going from 10 and 20% to 18 and 24, which is the same as currently applies to capital gains on property. So we think it's an increase which is reasonable, which asks people with those assets to make a bit of a contribution toward the public finances. And this is the theme of the budget. The budget is about asking people to make that contribution to the public finances whilst protecting working people. No increase in employer in national insurance or income tax for employees. Their pay slips will see no change from this budget.
Great stuff. We have to do with that. Thank you very much. That's James Murray, Labour MP. Thank you for coming into the studio here at GB News. Now, do you want to know how much Labour today's budget is going to cost you? Well, you can scan the QR code on your screen right now to find out. Now, Jubes & Co is up next. I'll be back tomorrow. But for now, here's your weather and have a fantastic evening.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Quite a cloudy afternoon on offer, but there is going to be largely dry with some brighter spells, particularly across the south and east, and feeling mild where you do catch that brighter weather. We've currently got high pressure over the UK, which is dominating our weather through today and for the rest of the week and into the weekend. So conditions not really changing. As we head into this evening, it is going to remain largely dry across the country, a mix of cloud and some clear spells, and where we see those clear skies for the longest, some pockets of mist and fog may develop. Turning damp across the northwest of Scotland though, and also across Shetland, so quite a damp morning by the time we reach Thursday, but otherwise remaining fairly mild across the country. To start off tomorrow then, as I say,